Hey, I'm Alex, and welcome to Hallucination. If you love true horror stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. The stories you'll hear are shared by our audience from Reddit, and to keep their original essence, I read them exactly as they were written. Before we begin, let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? Also, check the timestamps in the comments for story titles and easy navigation. Now, let's dive into the darkness. Hill House. I am documenting what happened because I wanted this story to come out years ago and it was never released. I understand why. After everything I and others endured though, I needed to be out. The reason any of it even happened in the first place is my fault. I was the cause for all of us to be in that house. I write this to warn others to not make the same stupid mistake I made. This is not a dare for someone to find the house. I will not even say the state the house is in. If by some miracle you somehow do find it, stay away. Let me explain. My name is James. Back in college, I was a commuter student. It was an hour drive up to the campus and an hour drive back home. I couldn't afford on-campus housing and was very fortunate that my parents would let me stay with them. As much as spending hundreds of dollars a month on gas and missing out on making friends sucked, home-cooked meals and a private bathroom made up for it more than enough. To get to campus, I had to drive over a bridge. About halfway through my junior year, there was an accident on that bridge. My GPS rerouted me to a path I had never taken before. Instead of my normal hour drive, it was up to 3 hours. About 30 minutes into the drive, I noticed that I hadn't passed anything for at least 15 minutes. No gas stations, no fast food restaurants, nothing. It was just a straight road and grass. At first I thought I must have just zoned out while driving. That had happened to me a lot since I drove so much. On subsequent drives on the same route while paying attention, sure enough, I would never see anything. Not even another car. Around 2 hours in is when you would be taken back into civilization. However, there was always one thing that I would pass. The house. It was hard not to notice. Not because it's the only structure for miles, but because of how it looked. It stood out like a sore thumb. For miles, all that could be seen was flat land. The house stood on a hill. The scenery leading up to it was lush greenery, as if Mother Nature herself had been looking after it. The house was gray and falling apart. On the right side of the house, there was a massive hole that bled into the roof. A hole so big that I could only imagine something the size of a meteor could have caused it. The house didn't even have a driveway. It was like the ground surrounding the house had swallowed the driveway to let people know they were not welcome inside. I asked my few friends on campus if they had ever seen or heard of the house. They had no clue what I was talking about, but they were intrigued. That weekend I took them to visit it. Something that I noticed on that trip was the mailbox. I must have been driving past the house too fast to see it every other time. It was slanted and rusty. The only number left on the side was 7. We were all too scared to get too close to the house and made lame excuses like it's just too far of a walk and yesterday was leg day. From there on out though, my friends and I took to calling it Hill House 7. We'd share horror stories on what happened inside. Some of my favorites were, a husband murdered his wife and ran off with the insurance money. The house still stands because her soul still dwells within its walls. Aliens crashed into the house and reside inside. They have learned to integrate themselves into society and live in the busted old house to avoid paying taxes. A serial killer tortures their victims in the basement. It's the perfect place for a murderer. The house is far enough away from society so the screams won't be heard, but close enough to society to work within it, make a living, and look for new subjects. If I didn't have to take the route that passed Hill House 7, I wouldn't. It always gave me chills to look at or even think about. I never witnessed anything abnormal inside the house, but word spread around campus about the house. My friends were very extroverted people, so I assumed they were the ones to tell others. Stories much worse than the ones we came up with were told. Apparently one girl visited the house on a dare and was never seen again. I never fully believed anything I heard, but I was always curious. I told myself that one day I would be man enough to enter the house. Years later I did. I just wish I hadn't. After college, I got a job at a small local news station. I had a computer science degree, so I felt upset with the position I was at in life. I felt that I deserved more. My mindset was that I should be working with dozens of geniuses every day. Instead, I was working in an apartment-sized office with barely any employees. We definitely didn't have the budget to bring on any other staff, and the size of the building couldn't handle any more people either. Sometimes it felt like we were canned sardines. If someone called in sick, we'd celebrate having some extra space instead of feeling sorry for them. The staff consisted of the owner, Mr. Yun, Glenn, Mark, Eddie, Jackson, Amanda, Marshall, and myself. A few years into this job, I remember walking into Mr. Yun's office to inform him that the toilets weren't flushing again. He was at his desk with his face in his hands. When he heard his door creak open, his head was pulled up with a struggle, as if there were a weight tied to his neck. His face had a look of distraught sewn onto it. "Everything all right, sir?" I asked. He became stressed very easily. Honestly, sometimes it annoyed my younger self because it happened so often. Mr. Yoon gave a deep sigh, then said, "Not exactly. The Halloween story I had planned to be shown is way more expensive than I thought. Halloween is in 2 days, and we have nothing ready to go as a backup. I have no idea what to do." "Can we just take off on Halloween?" I responded. "And upset the few advertisers we have left?" "No chance." Mr. Yun placed his head back in his hands. Suddenly I remembered the house. The thought of it rushed to my head like an Olympic runner to a finish line. I pondered on whether I should mention it or not. My rationale to suggest it was that this could be my chance to finally enter it. Being paid to step inside was an added bonus. "I may have an idea," I stated. "And that is?" Mr. Yun mumbled through his hands. "Hill House 7, saying its name aloud, after all those years, sent a shiver down my spine. Back in college, I found an old desecrated house. It looked like a professional haunted house or something you'd see out of a horror movie. Rumors of ghosts and spirits residing within the house circulated my campus. Maybe we could do a story on that?" "You want me to give TV time to an old house?" Mr. Yun scoffed. "My wife is old. You want to give her TV time too?" "I don't mean that we find out how the house got into the state it's in. I meant that we record the inside of the house. There's got to be something spooky inside that we could spin into an interesting story." Mr. Yun sat in silence for a moment before looking up at me. "Do you have a photo of this house? I'm not going to pay the crew to drive to a normal-looking suburban home." I pulled out my phone and began to scroll back. My phone's storage had been begging me to put it down, but I was too sentimental to delete anything or download my pictures somewhere. What if I needed them someday? That day proved to me that I was right. After scrolling back a few years, I finally found a photo. I hadn't seen the house for so long. Just seeing a picture of it shot me from a 26-year-old back into the shoes of my 19-year-old self. Mr. Yun's eyes glued to the photo. He didn't move for a good 45 seconds. For a moment I thought his constant stress had finally put him in a coma, and that I'd have to pull my phone from the hands of a corpse. His head snapped up as he handed my phone back. When Mr. Yun wasn't stressed, he spoke very matter-of-factly. The picture must have brought him some ease because he returned to his normal speaking pattern. "Take the van. Tell the rest of the crew that you all leave tomorrow. Buy some items from a Halloween store to fake some scares. If nothing happens while you are there, you make something happen. To spend the night if you have to. Am I clear?" "Yes, sir," I responded. Honestly, I didn't care what it took as long as I got the green light to visit the house on a paid trip. Faking some scares sounded easy enough to me. Definitely not my most difficult day on the job. In those days, I believed everything at the station wasn't hard though. My impression of the station was that it was inefficient and would have been run better by me. I left Mr. Yun's office and gathered the crew. I explained to them that we'd be taking a field trip the next day. The house was 8 hours away from the station, and we wanted to arrive when it was getting dark to maximize the creepiness factor. The plan was to leave at 12 p.m. the following day. When I got home from work, I was a bit ecstatic. So many years after seeing Hill House 7 for the first time and staring at it from afar, I would finally enter it. To think. My friends and I used to create stories about what happened inside, 7 years later, and I was going to do it again, but while inside. Waking up the next day, I shot out of bed, got dressed, and ran to a Halloween store nearby to purchase some Halloween decorations. It was pretty barren, but that was to be expected on the day before Halloween. I grabbed some fake spider webs, rubber spiders, plastic skeletons, an orb that you'd see a psychic use at a fair, and almost anything else that was left on the shelves. Nothing was too realistic, but with the right lighting, we could make a story out of it all. I threw it all into my car's trunk and made my way to the station. When I arrived, I saw Glenn packing the news van. Glenn was Mr. Yoon's son. He knew that the station wasn't as profitable as it once was, so he always took very good care of the camera equipment. We couldn't afford to buy any new equipment. The rust covering half the news logo on the van and a different colored door showed that to everyone on the road as it was driven around. Glenn was barely 20 years old and extremely kind. I always felt that innocent vibes emanated from him like an aroma from a flower. His sweetness was teased by Jackson. Jackson Todd was basically a high school bully that never grew up after graduation. I was reminded of this when I saw him trip Glenn as Glenn carried a box to the van. Amanda was in the passenger seat looking at herself in the mirror. She witnessed the trip and said nothing as she put eyeliner on. Sometimes I swore she didn't live in the same world as the rest of us. Jackson helped Glenn to his feet and condescendingly said, "You gotta look where you're walking, bud. This ground is uneven. It rises and falls all over the place. Be careful from now on, okay?" Yeah, I will. Thanks. Glenn spoke quietly as he checked the equipment inside the box. Jackson was a great douche. And Amanda just had a lot of personal issues. She'd carry a pocket mirror on her at all times and check her face at least once every 2 minutes. After her 30th birthday, she got very self-conscious about her looks. Deep down, I think she felt like with each passing year, she was worth less and less. She'd go on rants about how soon the station would replace her with someone younger. The next young hot thing would take her job as news anchor, she would say. When other news stations were on in the office, she'd analyze every female anchor. She'd comment on how great their noses were, how plump their lips were, their freckles, and any other minute detail she found. Complaints about herself spewed from her mouth like a waterfall day after day. Her face was constantly covered in pounds of makeup. Every year after turning 30, more makeup would be added. At the time we were going to visit the house, she was 34 years old. It's a shame what she thought of herself. She was beautiful and a kind soul before her mind began to deceive her. I parked my car next to Mark. Like everything else at the station, his car was cheap and poorly looked after. He didn't care much for the upkeep of anything after his wife passed away. I saw him yelling at his son in the back seat. What is his son doing here? I wondered. What I did know was that I was not stepping in to ask him while he was shouting, so I grabbed the bag of Halloween decorations from my car and walked over to the van. Like normal, Eddie had arrived in a stained t-shirt that didn't fit him. Half his belly button and the bottom of his hairy stomach poked out of the extra-large shirt. Eddie didn't have a tragic reason not to take care of himself like Mark. He was just disgusting. Some type of snack could always be found in his hand or nearby. That day, it was a bag of Cheetos. Glenn rushed over to help me with the bags I was carrying. 7 bags were strapped around my arms, shoulders, and neck. Back in the day, I was stubborn and too confident. 2 trips to bring the groceries inside. I didn't think so. I'd do everything in my power to make it only one. $18 for a cheeseburger at a restaurant for my girlfriend's birthday. Too expensive. I told her I would make one at home and had full confidence that my cooking would surpass the chefs with actual schooling and experience. Jackson smoked a cigarette and watched as Glenn and I packed everything into the van. By the time we were done, Mark was walking over to us with his son. I heard Jackson exclaim, "What's up with the kid?" It's hard to find a babysitter on such short notice. Maybe if we had known about this trip a week ago, then I could have found someone to watch him, Mark responded. He sounded more annoyed than usual. He's so small. How old is he? Like 4 years old? Jackson questioned as if he had never seen a child before. Travis is 8 years old and he's not going to be a bother, right? Mark stared down at Travis with intensity and spoke through gritted teeth. While staring at the ground, Travis whispered, "I won't be." Mark looked back up to the group and said, "Just think of today as a bring your kid to work day. Okay, let's head out." We couldn't yet though. Marshall still hadn't arrived. That was to be expected. He never arrived anywhere on time. If you wanted him somewhere at 6:30 p.m., you'd have to tell him 6 p.m. One day he was 2 hours late to work. Obviously Mr. Yoon was not very pleased. What could he do though? If he fired Marshall, he'd have to find someone else willing to work for as low of a pay as Marshall had. I heard that the minimum wage was shifted up a few dollars and Marshall's paycheck didn't budge. There was not a care in the world for Marshall. No rush or incentive to do anything. We sat around waiting for him for a little over 45 minutes. He pulled in and parked in a handicapped spot. Opening his car door released a cloud of smoke. The smoke fled from his car and rose into the air as he stepped out coughing. The stench protruding from Marshall was awful. I could practically see stench lines coming off of him like he was a cartoon character. "What's up, y'all?" Marshall asked while lifting up his sagging jeans. "Not your pants, I'll tell you that." Eddie put his orange-stained hand up, expecting a high five. Upon realizing that no one was going to take him up on that offer, he lowered his hand back into his bag of Cheetos. With everyone being present, we could finally head out. It was a long, awkward drive. If you think working in a confined space with people you don't know is weird, try an 8-hour car ride. Glenn drove since it was father's van, Amanda stayed in her position of passenger princess, and I was stuck with everyone else in the back. There were a lot of long moments of silence. Occasionally a conversation would strike up but would die out fast. This intensified the quiet. The dead space felt constricting at times. A few times Glenn would run over a pothole and mess up Amanda's makeup process. She was not pleased and slowly became vocal about it. This would prompt Jackson to make remarks like, "If you don't like your seat up there, I have a spot for you to sit on back here." You couldn't tell him to stop, or you'd only egg him on. Then he'd say increasingly worse things. At one point, I told him to watch what he was saying since a kid was around. Jackson proceeded to say every swear word in existence for the next 5 minutes. The drive was terrible, but nothing could stop my excitement of returning to Hill House 7. When we finally did arrive, it was exactly as I remembered it from all those years ago. The pit I had in my stomach returned like it was the first time I had ever seen the house. The difference was, this time I had a newfound burst of energy and I was going to enter inside. There's no driveway. "What way do I drive?" Glenn asked as he pulled the car onto the side of the road. "Just park it here. That's what my friends and I used to do," I responded. "I get a ticket. I can't come back to my dad with a ticket on the company van." Jackson chimed in, "You won't get a ticket. You're going to go to jail. Don't worry, Amanda. I'll drive you home." "Plenty of cars do it. You'll be fine," I quickly retorted. I really had seen many cars parked on the side of the road as I commuted to and from campus. A mix of feeling questioned, my eagerness to look inside, and the desire to get out of the back of the van all led to me coming off annoyed. Honestly, I was. The car ride and Jackson's comments certainly didn't help with that. Glenn put the car into park and took the key out of the ignition. I burst through the back doors of the van. Air had never felt so crisp and refreshing before. Outside it was dark, but the house illuminated itself to me like a beacon. How a lighthouse makes itself known to unsuspecting ships. There was no physical light coming from the house, so maybe it was actually trying to repel me away from danger. The same as the true purpose of lighthouses is to keep ships from crashing into it and nearby hazards. There were 7 bags and 8 of us. Mark wanted Travis to grab a bag so he'd carry his weight on this trip. The bag was half the kid's height and he struggled to even lift it. Glenn silently walked over to Travis, knelt down, smiled, and took the bag from him with his open hand. Everyone walked towards the house, while Mark and Travis stayed in the back of the group. Mark was whispering, but I could make out phrases like, "Don't embarrass me," like that again. The walk to the house felt longer than it used to be. Originally, I believed it must have been something to do with age. Maybe my stamina had just decreased. It was an uphill walk. Looking back, I'm not so sure that was the case. Arriving at the porch, we found that the door was already open. Amanda, Eddie, and Travis were ready to turn back around right then and there. I was too involved with this to leave. Jackson had a tough guy persona he had to uphold, and Mark and Marshall didn't really care either way. Amanda was the first to speak. "This place is stressing me out. Stress creates wrinkles, and I have an image to maintain. Let's leave." "Sweetheart, I'll protect you from the monsters that lurk around all corners inside." "Don't worry," Jackson exclaimed as he wrapped his arm around Amanda. She swiftly swatted it off like it was a mosquito. "You really want to miss the opportunity to be on camera for a potentially popular story?" I asked. It was manipulative of me to use something she was self-conscious about against her. Back then I didn't really care. I needed them all to stay and didn't care what they thought about it all. "I'm sorry to everyone. I am." "Out of my way." Amanda shoved everyone aside and walked in. We all followed. The foyer was essentially empty. It had stairs, with boards which were most likely unsafe to walk on, that led to the second floor. The center of the room had a damp carpet littered with rips, holes, and weird stains. From the foyer, the house branched off into 3 rooms. Walking straight from the front door and past the stairs would take you to a full bath. A few of the corners of the bathroom had mold, but the wallpaper was a nice shade of yellow. Rust surrounded the faucets of the sink and bathtub. As a joke, I turned the knobs to the sink. A loud rumbling sound emanated from the pipes below the sink, before a rush of water flowed from the faucet. We were all genuinely surprised. Not only did the sink have running water, but the bathtub did as well. The toilet refused to flush, then proceeded to gift us with the sight of watching a rat crawl up through the hole of the toilet bowl. The room on the right of the foyer took you into the living room. This is the room where the meteor-sized hole resided. Large puddles of water glistened in the moonlight near where I presumed a window used to be. The couch was flipped onto its back. The cushions were torn up and the bottom of the couch had a spray-painted word scrawled onto it. The writing was sloppy, but I was able to make out the word change. I had no clue what this meant at the time and could only think about how much this house had changed from its original inception. Multiple families must have lived here over the years and called it home. A once loved home which now looked like it was begging to be put out of its misery after decades of neglect. Taking a left at the foyer led you into the kitchen. Cabinet doors covered parts of the floor. A few were covered in scratches. I remember thinking that this place must have been a hotspot for stray cats and homeless people. Above the oven, the wall was charred, like someone had chosen to set fire and scorch only one part of the house. The kitchen table stood at a slant near the window. One of its legs was off. "Who would take off a single table leg?" Glenn asked me. "I don't know. I know where they put it though." I motioned over to the kitchen sink. The table leg was poking out of the wall. Upon a closer look, someone had scratched lustful into the leg and the end was sharpened. "People sure are weird, right?" Glenn looked to me for an answer. Yeah, I responded. Years of desiring to come inside, and it was weirder than my friends and I ever imagined. It was oddly enthralling to me at the time. Marshall walked into the kitchen and caught us staring at the table leg. "That's a big splinter. Watch out, y'all." It was a terrible joke, but his stereotypical surfer boy accent got a chuckle out of Glenn and I. Marshall was certainly lazy, but he was also definitely funny. If he got you to laugh, the comedian in him wanted to keep the ball rolling with more and more jokes that built off the original one. He followed up with, "You know, when I was young, I once got a terrible splinter in my finger at school. It felt the size of that table leg. I was so scared to go to the nurse's office because the last time I had a splinter, she had me pluck it out myself." "Were you able to do it?" Glenn interrupted with an odd sense of interest. "Not a chance. I just cried until my mom showed up and did it for me. All of this is to say I didn't go to the nurse's office to get this splinter out, right? Eventually white puss starts to come out of it. While I'm at lunch one day, my buddy asks what was on my finger. I told him what any responsible kid would, that it was cream from an Oreo. "No, you did not," I said through laughter. I did, Marshall proclaimed. "That's not even the craziest part. He asks me if he can have some, so I let him lick it off my finger." "That's disgusting. There's no way your friend did that," Glenn chuckled. "We were in the 3rd grade. We did basically anything that our friends said. If you think that's bad, wait until I tell you about the time we found a snake on the playground." Marshall was cut off by heavy thumping sounds coming down the stairs. "What was that?" Glenn stepped closer to me. "Jackson went to look at the 2nd floor. He must be coming back down," Marshall answered. All 3 of us walked back into the foyer and found Jackson trying to pull his foot out of a hole in the bottom stair. He yelled out, "Upstairs sucks. Every room in this house is trashed, and having no power is growing old already. I would have seen this stupid hole if we had lights instead of these bargain bin flashlights. Let's record and get out of here." Jackson was heated, but he was right. The group came to record a segment for Mr. Yun, not to just explore. I was there to explore, but they didn't know that. Glenn walked over to his box of camera equipment and began to distribute GoPros to everyone. Travis didn't receive one, but you can't pack a GoPro for someone you weren't expecting to come. Glenn could tell Travis felt left out, so Glenn let him hold his while he explained the GoPros to the group. The cameras are attached to a harness. You put on the harness, press the power button on the side, and they'll start to record. Also attached to the harness is a flashlight stronger than the ones we had lying around in the van. Everyone got it. "Where's my normal camera? These are so small." Eddie gave the camera a look of perplexion. "Is the camera small, or are you just really big?" Jackson mumbled. Glenn ignored Jackson. "These are all we got. My dad was afraid we'd break the actual cameras if he wasn't here to supervise us. We only have 7 GoPros in total, so don't screw around with them." "We had 10. What happened to the other 3? Marshall asked. "We've only ever had 7. Glenn nervously insisted. I interrupted a potential argument with, "Marshall, I'll take your side if you can tell me what today's date is." Marshall paused and stared at the ceiling. He answered, "Touche." Glenn flashed me a look of thank you before we all set off to set up different decorations around the house. The idea was simple. Our anchors Amanda and Jackson would say they are here to investigate a house that was reportedly haunted. When we got back to the studio, a crazy backstory for the house would be invented for a voiceover that play over multiple stills of the house. Amanda and Jackson would explore the house for the first time and encounter different spooky events set up with the decorations. Everyone else would be in different rooms to capture various angles. We shot footage for about an hour. Honestly, it came out better than everyone expected. The GoPros made it look similar to a found footage horror film, a low-budget one, but one nonetheless. The darkness of the house covered a lot of imperfections with the Halloween decorations. Even rubber spiders with googly eyes came off as real. Amanda was not a fan of that. We discovered spiders were one of her biggest fears. Jackson used this for his own amusement when he chased her around with a fake one. He giggled at her shrieks of terror. Later in the night, Eddie swore he saw one of the rubber spiders move. Maybe it did. After shooting Wrapped, everyone was exhausted. It was a little past 9 p.m., and the drive back would have us return at roughly 5 a.m. The whole plan of us coming here was so rushed that no one considered what we'd do after recording. We couldn't just drive back. All of us were too tired. I knew for a fact that there weren't any hotels around for hours either. None of us knew what to do. That's when an idea crept from the abyss of my mind. What if we just slept here for the night? The idea was crazy and certainly would be a tough sell, but I wanted to explore the second floor more and see if the house had a basement. I did not take an awkward 8-hour drive to not get everything out of Hill House 7. There wasn't an easy way to suggest the idea, so I blurted it out, ripped the band-aid right off. What if we slept here tonight? Their chattering was immediately halted to a silence. My words acted as an assassin of conversation. Those few seconds of quiet became ages. I felt compelled to explain, but I couldn't let them know why I truly wanted to stay. They think of me as selfish, which I was, but I didn't want them to know that. I know it doesn't sound like a great suggestion at first. What else are we going to do though? If any of us try to drive, we will most likely end up in an accident due to exhaustion. This place isn't so bad. There's still some mattresses upstairs we could use. The couch is an option if we flip it upright and find the cushions. It's one night. We can make it work for one night. The group remained silent as they thought over my words. Glenn was the first one to speak up. I can wreck the van, or my dad will kill me. One night can be so bad, right? Reluctantly, everyone else began to agree. Eddie voiced a concern that was shared by Travis. They were both scared to sleep alone. All of us went up to the second floor, grabbed the mattresses, and brought them back downstairs. We set the mattresses next to each other in a square shape in the center of the foyer. I was the first to remove my GoPro harness and hand it back to Glenn. Glenn didn't accept it. Everyone can hold on to their GoPro for the night, so you have a flashlight in case you need to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. Please just be careful with them, Glenn explained. Most of us thanked Glenn before laying down to fall asleep. From here, this is where everything went downhill. Each one of us experienced something different. To make this as coherent as possible, I am going to explain what happened to each one of us individually based on what I witnessed in the GoPro footage. First, I will start with Eddie. His footage starts out in darkness. A few seconds in, Eddie whispered, "What was that?" He proceeded to click the flashlight on and attach the GoPro harness back on. The camera turned to show that the kitchen door was closed. This stuck out because I am certain that we left every door open out of fear of something hiding from us. Light peeked out from underneath the kitchen door. Eddie tried shaking Marshall awake to no success. What's that smell?" Eddie asked himself. He stood up and crept toward the kitchen. His large hand surrounded the doorknob and slowly turned it. The door opened with a loud creaking sound. Eddie stepped inside and found a wrapped-up chocolate on the floor. There was a moment of hesitation before he bent over, picked it up, and inspected it. "I haven't seen this brand since I was a kid. Mom used to buy these for me all the time." The wrapper crinkled as he opened it. His chewing was reminiscent of a pig. Each smack of his lips made it sound like he was out of breath, but was always followed by a sigh of delight. While licking his fingers, he turned to find a trail of the chocolates leading to the fridge. Eddie looked around before following the trail and picking up each chocolate along the way. He stepped up to the fridge door and found that it was ajar. Not only was it open, it seemed that it was slowly turning open by itself. Eddie assisted the door in its mission to open. We didn't check inside the fridge when we investigated the house, because we thought there was no use. Eddie was the first to see inside of it. The outside of the fridge was banged up. The inside looked brand new. On the middle shelf sat a bowl of spaghetti and meatballs. Steam was rising from the bowl like it was freshly made. Eddie reached inside and grabbed it. He placed it on the kitchen counter and just stared at it for several minutes. The silence of the house was broken when he said aloud, "How is this possible? No one has made the meatballs look like this since, Mom." The meatballs all had a circular indent carved inside of them. They reminded me of the Death Star. His hand reached out and grabbed a meatball. Hesitantly, almost out of fear, Eddie raised the meatball to his mouth and began to chew it. A female voice whispered from behind him, "Good boy." Eddie fell to the floor and the footage went black for an hour. 11 minutes in, sounds of a chair scraping along the floor bursted through. 23 minutes later, pots and pans clanging began. 8 minutes later, and a knife could be heard chopping. Roughly 18 minutes passed before Eddie awoke and sat up. He was still in the kitchen, but now he was at the kitchen table. The kitchen table stood up straight. I wondered how the table was fixed. The only light in the room was from the bulb that hung above the table. The rest of the kitchen was engulfed by darkness. Eddie began to pant like he was struggling to move. I sat and watched for 2 minutes of Eddie seeming to try and move, but to no avail. The same female voice outside of the camera's view screamed out, "He's feeding time." The voice was deep and oddly loving, like it cared that it was feeding time. Eddie's shaking began to become quicker, more desperate. Suddenly, a pale, skinny arm slowly came into frame. The skin looked like paper mache with some of it scrunching up or peeling off. In its wrinkled hand, it held a rusty spoon containing a substance I don't even know how to describe. It was red yet green and brown. Liquid dripped off the spoon, but the food was solid. The voice scolded. "What did I say about electronics at the table? This just will not do." The hand sped out of frame. Click. The harness holding the camera and flashlight were detached from Eddie, then carefully placed on the kitchen table in front of him. Now I was able to see everything. Eddie was tied to a large high chair. Around his neck sat a bib that read "Mama's Baby Boy." The spoon peeked through the curtain of black that surrounded Eddie. The same arm brought the mush back to Eddie's mouth. Eddie moved his head away and whimpered out, "P, please. Please let me go." The female voice seemed concerned, not hungry. "You used to love this stuff." Eddie began to tear up. "I don't know what's going on or who you are. Please let me go home. I'm begging you." The voice continued to ignore his pleas. "I spent so long making this meal and you refuse to eat it. Help, help. Mommy did not starve herself to allow you to eat, for you to not eat." The monster, whom I referred to as Mother, whipped her left hand onto Eddie's jaw. Both of her arms were long and had the appearance of fragility, but they had a true strength to them. Her fingers latched onto the sides of Eddie's jaw like a monkey wrench to a bolt. It squeezed on tight and pulled so hard that it elongated Eddie's face. All that Eddie could do was cry and give screams of agony as his face was morphed and stretched into something unrecognizable. Mother's fingers were rotting. A flap of skin fell into Eddie's mouth and sat just below his tongue. He whimpered as it disintegrated in his mouth due to the buildup of saliva that had formed. The pool of saliva rose and rose before it began to steadily leak out of the corners of his mouth. Mother hovered the spoon inside of Eddie's mouth. She flipped the spoon and plopped the food onto his tongue. Using her grip on his jaw, she moved her hand up and down to force Eddie to chew. Eddie gave a painful expression as he swallowed. His face looked as if he swallowed broken glass and rusted nails. "It's good, right?" Mother asked with, from what I could tell, sincerity. She released his jaw and revealed her face. Her neck elongated and slithered like a snake as her head came out of the darkness. The head was enormous. The best description I could give to its size is for you to imagine the height and width of a Ferris wheel, but from the perspective of an ant. The skin covering her face drooped like melting wax. Any move of her neck caused a wave of skin to ripple across the rest of her face. Her hair was sparse, and what little remained constantly fell out like a shedding dog. Her eye sockets were craters with bulging veins that never stopped moving. The blood flowed through her veins with the movement pattern of a slug. Odd thing was, her actual eyes were tiny. The eyes looked like small buttons placed inside of a bowl. That didn't make her glare any less intense, though. I could feel it through the screen, so I cannot imagine what Eddie was feeling in person. Her lips cracked with the appearance of broken ceramic every time she spoke, but her teeth looked perfect. The neck twisted and turned until it got Mother's head beside Eddie's ear. She whispered, "You seem so stressed. Normally when you're stressed, you eat." Her voice began to rise. "You damn near eat us out of house and home." Mother chuckled to herself. She wrapped her neck around the front of Eddie to speak in his other ear. "I don't get it. I just don't get it. I starve myself, so you can eat more. And yet, after I spend an hour of my time to make you a home-cooked meal, you refuse. You act like you don't like it when I've watched you eat pizza with syrup on it. You'll eat anything. So why not my cooking? Is it me?" Large tears began to stream from Mother's face. She turned away from Eddie. His jaw hung like a damp towel in the wind as he attempted to say, "No, it's not you." Mother went silent. The last of her tears boomed on the floor. "You're right. It's not me. It's you. You're ungrateful. Ungrateful of my time and effort. I've been working 10-hour shifts since your father abandoned us, and do I get any sort of gratitude? No." Eddie began to speak with true remorse. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know. If I had known, I would have—" "No more excuses, young man. You will eat this food and you will like it." Mother unwrapped her neck around Eddie. Her face covered the entire backdrop of the screen as her left arm locked back in on Eddie's jaw. Her right arm began to rapidly go in and out of frame as it filled the spoon, put it in his mouth, fed him, and repeated. Eddie desperately tried to swallow each spoonful before the next one came, but Mother only came back quicker over time. Each return of the spoon became more forceful than the last. Eddie began to choke on the food, but that did not stop Mother from feeding him more. His eyes bulged out of his sockets as blood mixed with tears flowed down his cheeks. A drop of blood landed on the bib and took the shape of a heart. The spoonful started to be slammed into the back of his throat. The sounds that croaked out of Eddie were the most awful sounds I have had the displeasure of hearing. Imagine a duck slowly being choked out. Imagine it pleading for its life as someone's hands became tighter around its neck. Eddie's face turned a darker shade of purple with each slam. Blood began to fling out with each exit of the spoon from his throat. Eddie's body went limp by the time his face was a red-purple color and his jaw was 3 times its normal size. Mother continued to force-feed him again and again for another 15 minutes until his mouth could not physically hold anymore. Mother deeply breathed in and out with exhaustion. She released Eddie's jaw like a toy she was done playing with. His face immediately slammed into the kitchen table. Mother looked at her work and caringly said, "I hope you're finally full. Enjoy your nap, my sweet baby boy." That was the last thing on the recording before it abruptly cut off. I hope you all see now why I wanted this story out. Eddie didn't deserve his fates, and neither did the others who didn't make it. I'm happy to say that some of us did make it out, but all of us should have. I'll write about what happened to the others sometime soon. It's hard for me to go back and watch these knowing that every second was my doing, all over some obsession I had in college. If you don't continue to read what happened to the others, I understand. However, I truly believe each of their stories deserves to be out there. My friends and I found an abandoned oil rig. I watched as the helicopter pilot began his preparations to take off, barely a minute after touching down on the helipad. As Mark helped Savannah step down off the vehicle, the pilot gestured towards his headset, and I fished my radio receiver from my pocket and put my own headset on, barely quieting the still spinning rotors. "You guys good?" "I think we're good here, man. Thanks again." "Don't mention it. Just remember that you've only got exactly 48 hours. If you're not back on the platform and ready by then, I'll have to wait another week to swing back around and get you, and that'll cost extra. Good luck. I'll see you guys then." I thanked him, and as soon as the others finished unloading our prepared bags onto the helipad, we stood and watched as the helicopter took flight and disappeared quickly into the inky blackness of a starless night. I waited a moment longer, looking out into the open ocean below me, my headlight beam faintly glittering against the calm ripples of the sea. "We don't have all night. Let's get indoors before the wind picks up," Julian muttered, breaking the silence. I turned away from the sea and towards the group. Julian had already picked up his duffel bag and had already begun to hastily move towards the stairs descending to the crew quarters. Mark seemed solemn as usual, but even in the dark I could make out the smile creeping through his face as he helped Savannah grab her bags as she kissed him on the cheek. Maria sat silent, eyes locked on the clouds that had swallowed up our transport. As Mark and Savannah descended out of view, I stood next to my sister, putting my hand on her tense shoulder as I noticed her knuckles turn white gripping her backpack. "You all right?" I asked after a moment. She stood motionless, and I felt her shoulders shivering. Mark said we should be able to get the rig's reserve power on. If we get inside, we'll be able to warm up. She turned her head to me and attempted to mask her frightened face with a sheepish smile. Yeah, sure. Sorry, it's just different than I expected. A bit, yeah. I lied. In truth, I'd studied my ass off, doing as much weeks prior to our arrival at the rig. I'd poured through company records. I'd watched every video I could explaining oil rig architecture, and I'd even researched local oceanic weather patterns this time of year for this area. Shed begged to come along, but now standing here shaking, it was obvious she hadn't prepared like the rest of us. I gently grabbed her backpack from her shaking hand and made my way towards the staircase. She followed close behind, and as we made our way towards the large bolted door sealing off the crew area, she quietly called over. Hey Ely, what's up? Thanks for letting me and Julian tag along. I nodded, as if it were no big deal that they'd been permitted to join this expedition. Mark had approached me weeks ago with the opportunity of a lifetime, an oil rig in international waters, decommissioned for almost a decade, unmanned, and slated to be dismantled in the coming months. Even though we were further from a city than any of us had ever been, this was undoubtedly an urban explorer's wet dream. It had been years since Mark, Savannah, and I had the opportunity to go somewhere new, and with our increasingly busy lives, we figured that this was the perfect last hurrah for our old hobby. The timing worked out perfect, and we each managed to scrape enough money together to find and hire a private helicopter pilot to make the 2 trips required to drop us off and pick us back up. In all fairness, Maria had joined us on some of our trips in years prior. Being a few years younger than us, we'd opted to only let her tag along on our lower stakes outings, but she was an adult now and had begged to be allowed to come with us for this final trip. It took a substantial amount of convincing for Savannah and Mark to vote yes on bringing her, but it certainly didn't hurt that Maria's new boyfriend Julian had actually worked 6 months on a rig a few years back. As I pushed the heavy iron door open, the hinges groaned against the salt-corroded metal, the sound carrying through the empty corridors. I found the rest of the group already making their way through the narrow hallway, and was relieved to see that the area generally matched what I'd already researched. The quarters consisted of 2 floors, the upper of which we were currently passing through to reach the lower-level access stairs at the end of the hall. We passed the expected amenities, including a galley, a laundry room, several changing rooms, and a large dry storage pantry, long empty. The crew living area, consisting of a common room and several shared bedrooms, waited for us 1 level below. As we descended the stairs, we each found a bedroom to begin to unload our things. For the next 2 nights, these quiet, windowless white rooms would be our home. I unpacked my bedroll and went to sit on the bunk bed, when I heard Mark call out to gather us in the hall. As I stood in the doorway, he smiled and looked around at each of us before speaking. All right, so we made it. Place seems to be in much better condition than we expected to, which is a good sign. I think before we start settling in for the night though, we should review our plan. A couple of us let out an overly dramatic sigh, and I looked over to see Savannah chuckle as she rolled her eyes. Even though a plan was a necessity in a situation like this, we all knew that Mark would plan his own funeral if he could. Yeah, get it out of your system. Mark smirked. We'll have a busy day of fooling around out here tomorrow, but there are still precautions and things we need to take care of first. Julian, you'll come with me up to the control deck here in a minute to see if we can get the auxiliary generators running. That'll get us some light and heat in here. Elijah, you stay here with Maria and Sav. Julian, you ready? Sure, just give me a minute to get my stuff. I looked across the hall to see Julian smiling for the first time all day. He was hard to read at times, but I could tell the familiarity of a place like this was slowly starting to bring him to life. As Mark dismissed us from our meeting, I smiled as I gestured a sloppy salute. I watched Julian pop back into the room he'd chosen and shut the door behind him for a few moments. A minute later, he emerged, pulling a pair of bolt cutters and utility gloves from his duffel bag. Maria, already changed into more comfortable clothes, ran her fingers through his curly hair and hugged him before he and Mark left. For the first time since we'd boarded the helicopter earlier that evening, I had a few minutes to unwind. It was still too cold inside to take off my jacket just yet, but I kicked off my boots and laid down on the carpeted floor. Unlike anything we'd ever explored before, this place was actually fairly well kept. The carpet, although old and shaggy, was free of debris and still felt soft to the touch. My headlamp illuminated a pristine white ceiling, lower than what I expected. As Maria tried to keep idle conversation with Savannah, I just smiled and shut my eyes for a minute, enjoying the satisfaction of having pulled off the coolest B&E ever. It must have been about 10 minutes later when a low vibrating grumble shook the floor beneath us for just a minute, before settling to a droning hum barely perceptible but distinct from the ocean waves. I felt a shot of icy ocean air begin to flow through the vent above my head, before softening and becoming warm and cozy comfort. I stood up and quickly located a light switch at the end of the hallway. Flicking it bathed us in bright artificial white light. The girls stood up and we began to take in our surroundings in full when the door at the far end of the common room swung open, Mark and Julian returning to join us in the warm. Maria ran up to Julian and practically tackling him as she showered praises on him with the giddiness of a schoolgirl. Mark sauntered across the newly ago interior, taking in its artifice and cramped nature before plopping down next to Savannah, resting his head on her shoulder. He looked more tired than usual, and I recognized his brow furrow. "How was it out there? You guys find the control deck okay?" I prodded after a moment. "Yeah, it was fine. Julian had it right on the money. Dude knew exactly where to take us, right over the moon pool, at the very top." He sounded almost apathetic as he told me, his eyes gazing off into nowhere as Savannah scratched his back. "Everything okay, man? You seem a little out of it. Something happened out there." Mark stared blankly for a few seconds, until his eyes focused on me and he seemed to process what I'd said. "Oh yeah, no, nothing happened, don't worry. It's just, like you know when you're hit with a really bad déjà vu and instead of it only lasting a second, it lasts for like a minute or two." Savannah stopped scratching his back and wrapped her arm around his shoulders, pulling him closer. "Yeah," she chimed in. "I get that sometimes. It's probably gonna happen at least once or twice when we're here. Been a while since we got in somewhere that wasn't rinsed already. It'll feel just like college." "Yeah, I guess so." Mark seemed distant still. Julian and Maria came and sat down in the hall with us, smiling and holding hands. After a few seconds, Mark's eyes suddenly lit up. "You guys won't believe how sick tomorrow's gonna be. Even just what I could see with my headlamp looked incredible. Up top in the control room, there's a shit ton of old broadcasting equipment, and you'll never guess what Julian found under the control desk." He paused, either for dramatic effect or because he really wanted us to guess. After a moment of our non-compliance, he rolled his eyes and reached into his jacket's interior pocket, pulling out a key ring with what I could only assume was every key and access tag we'd need to find our way around the facility. Holy shit, it was just there under the desk? "Yeah," he said on his old rig, "the manager dude. Hey Jewel, what did you say he's called?" "The tool pusher," Julian said, wrapping his arm around Maria as she pulled at the carpet. "Yeah, the tool pusher. Anyways, the tool pusher would always keep a master key set in his office. Only people with the office key could get in, so it was never a problem. Thankfully, we brought a key of our own." He gestured towards the bolt cutters that Julian had set down in the hall. We laughed for a moment, then a few more. It was good to all be here, to have successfully pulled this off. We'd never cracked anything like this before, and I won't lie, I think we were all just a little giddy that we'd done it. After a bit, Maria caught me beginning to yawn, and followed suit. Sav checked the time, and we were surprised to see that we'd somehow already spent an hour on board, and midnight was rapidly approaching. Mark made some dumb remark about time flying when you're having fun, and told us to plan to wake up at 7 so we could start exploring the upper levels. Julian and Maria slipped into their room as Savannah helped pull Mark up, and the two of them wished me goodnight before retreating to their bunk. I closed my door behind me and thought to myself that this was a pretty awesome last hurrah before turning in for the night. I woke up the next morning to the sound of Mark knocking on my door. "Hey Ely, wake up man. It's nearly 7:30. We managed to get the water and stove running in the galley. Oatmeal and bacon for breakfast if you're hungry." I rolled over and checked my phone. I hadn't bothered to set an alarm, but I figured I wouldn't have slept so well as to sleep in. I groggily rolled out of bed and got dressed for the day before joining the others in the galley. Maria greeted me with a sly smile. "Morning, idiot. Couldn't sleep." "No, I slept too well. Usually I can't sleep on boats. The rocking bothers me too much." Savannah put down her instant coffee and rolled her eyes at me. "Well, we're not on a boat, Eli. There's not going to be any rocking. This thing is bolted to the sea floor." Julian put up his hand, taking a second to chew and swallow before interjecting. "No, that's just shallow rigs. Deepwater rigs like this are tensioned to the ocean floor with cables, so they're still pretty sturdy, but they do float and rock a bit." "So why didn't we feel any rocking last night?" Julian shrugged. "The sea must have been pretty calm all night, I guess." Mark scoffed. No way, dude. You felt how windy it was when we went out there. This thing would have been rocking like crazy if it wasn't bolted all the way down. Julian sat, brow furrowed for a second before shrugging and returning to his food. We all finished up our breakfast and Savannah returned to their room to grab her camera while we prepared to leave the quarters. As we stepped out into the salty morning air, the daylight washed the rig in a radiant glow. It was incredible how different it looked in the daytime, the yellow structure towering past the narrow catwalk leading away from the living area. I looked down beneath the grated floor beneath me and noted that the waves seemed much more intense this morning than they had last night, crashing against the gargantuan structure sinking beneath their depths. I still didn't feel any rocking. As much as Mark typically acted a de facto leader of sorts, there was a silent understanding that, at least for today, we followed Julian. He knew the ins and outs of a place like this, and would be way less likely to get lost if we stayed close. He led us around the catwalk towards the stairs that would take us to the upper levels. Savannah stopped us what seemed like every 20 feet to get another picture of the rig, and as much as I wanted to be annoyed, I couldn't blame her. We had entered dozens of brutalist structures before, but the rig took the cake for the most striking. Outside the crew quarters, every fastener served a purpose, nothing wasted on form over function. Platforms hung suspended in the air above our heads, utility sections that would normally be hidden from view intertwined and encompassing the limited areas designated for human use. As she stopped to take a photo of one of the platforms ahead of us, Savannah froze in place before lowering her camera and gesturing for us to hold still. "Guys, do you see that?" We looked to where she indicated, and sure as day there was a security camera aimed right at us. My head immediately began to swivel around wildly, searching for any other cameras we may have missed. As Savannah, Maria, and I slowly started panicking, Mark began to laugh at us. "I noticed those last night too," Mark said with a shit-eating grin. I flipped out too. Julian was kind enough to wait 5 minutes before explaining that they're not broadcasting anywhere off-site, they're wired in directly to the on-site systems. Julian leaned smugly against the rails. "You could have at least let them freak out about it for a few more seconds, man. Would have been hilarious." Savannah rolled her eyes and playfully punched Mark in the shoulder as she passed him on the stair. By the time we finished exploring the middle deck, it was nearly 9. We paused for a while to look out into the open sea. After a while, Maria coughed, an attempt to snag our attention. "So, I don't want to sidetrack anything we're doing, but are we going to check out the signal or what?" "What signal?" I asked. Savannah and Mark looked equally confused. Julian's face soured and I caught him nudging her arm as if she had brought up something sensitive. She shot him an incredulous look before continuing. "It's just, well, before we went to bed last night, Jewel was telling me that. I said it was probably nothing. Drop it." Julian nearly snapped at her. I stood up straight from the railing I'd been leaning against, attempting to place myself closer between the two. "No, go on, Maria, what was he telling you?" She looked nervous, like a puppy backed into a corner. "Well, it's just that he said that there was a signal that was being broadcast to the radio in the control room. He saw the oscilli something showing a reading, but the audio must have been turned off. I was under the impression he must have told you." Mark arose from his resting place as well, also moving towards Julian. His laid-back visage was quickly shed, replaced with a burning red anger. "And you didn't bring this up. Why? If someone knows we're here, we could be seriously screwed. You and your girlfriend included. That must have been, what, 10 hours ago?" Julian backed away from the two of us, as Savannah put her hand on Mark's shoulder. "Babe, he probably just didn't think about that. It's fine. Well, go check it out. And if it's not, if we end up in prison because we agreed to let Maria and this jack-off tag along." I turned to Mark. "Whoa, man, Maria's the one who just let us know. Leave her out of this." Julian, caught in the middle between Mark and I, stepped back and towards Maria. Whoa, guys. Calm down. I didn't mean anything by it. I saw the oscilloscope. I saw that it looked like it had been running a while, and I saw that the audio wasn't turned on. Signals come and go from these places all the time, regardless if anyone's here. I didn't bring it up because I thought it would be fun to show you guys today. That's all, swear." Mark pointed a large, angry finger into Julian's chest. "You're going to take us up there right now and show us that signal. And if there's even one hint of trouble for us, you can bet your ass the cops or the Coast Guard or whoever shows up will know just who it was that broke us in here." Julian led the way back up to the control room at the top of the rig. It was several levels higher than where we'd been prior, and reminded me of a fire watch tower overlooking the whole of the structure. Mark pulled the ring of keys from his pocket, but Julian reminded him of last night's handiwork. He pushed the door open easily. The handle had already been destroyed by the bolt cutters. As we collectively entered the control room, it was immediately clear that this was the most advanced facility we'd seen yet. On the wall to our left, broadcasting equipment covered the entire half of the room, wires running in and out of plugs, long deactivated monitors dispersed throughout the tangled mass of cords. The wall immediately across from us consisted only of a large window, splashed and stained with dried sea salt. Outside, the window overlooked a crane that jutted out from the platform, its cable dangling far down into the murky water of the moon pool below us, concealing what lay at the end. On the wall to our right, a small metal desk lay covered in documents, while a massive control panel to its side glittered with shimmering indicators and buttons. Julian made his way over to the broadcasting station and indicated to a small green display. Sure enough, a sound wave bounced along the screen, a signal of some sort making its way to the device while no output could be heard. "Well, find a way to turn the sound on," Mark implored. I could hear the thinly veiled curiosity poorly hidden behind the guise of anger. Julian searched for a moment before seemingly finding the correct knob. He turned it, and as he did, the audio signal began to play through the speakers. The sound of rushing water could clearly be heard, the slosh echoing and distorted. "See? I told you it was no big deal. Just some microphone attached to the structure down at the surface." As soon as the words left Julian's mouth, a voice began to cry out through the signal. It was grainy and distorted, as though the microphone recording was too close and too old. "Oh God, it worked. You're there. Please, you have to hurry. I need help." We sat frozen where we stood for several seconds, not knowing what to say. Maria cautiously approached the console, finding the closest thing that looked like a microphone, and began to speak into it. "Hello? Who is this? Why do you need help?" The voice cracked to life once more, this time louder and more difficult to make out. Yes, I need help. Underneath the... We can hear you. The signal is too distorted. Slow down. Where are you?" "Underneath the rig, in the sub-facility. You'll need to take the lander. It's in the moon pool. Please, the chamber I'm stuck in is slowly filling up with water. I have hours left at most. You need to come and activate the pumps. They're down here, but I'm locked out. Please hurry." We all looked at each other for a moment. Was this some sort of joke? What sub-facility? Savannah grabbed the microphone from Maria. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. Did you say you were nearby the oil rig? Are you in a submarine or something?" "No, I told you. I'm underneath the rig. The rig is a farce. The real facility is under the water. You can get here via the lander. I think it's the blue button right next to the desk behind you. Please hurry." The audio cut off suddenly. We sat there in silence for about 2 minutes before I spoke up. We should try to help, shouldn't we?" Mark looked at me like I was insane. "Help? Help? Who? The mystery man who claims to be under the water? In a facility under an oil rig that no one's visited in a decade? Be serious, Elijah. This is clearly some sort of hoax." Savannah leaned against the desk, putting her head in her hands. "I don't know, Mark. Whoever that was sounded pretty scared. Maybe this is legit." I looked across the room. Sure enough, on the panel next to the desk, a square blue button sat out amongst the rest. Underneath it, in black lettering, read the words, "Submersible lander, from my research, a type of underwater elevator." As Mark and Savannah argued about the legitimacy of the signal, I walked over to the panel. Maria stood next to me, and as I saw the fear in her eyes, I knew she believed the mysterious voice just as much as I had. I pressed the button. The klaxon alarm sounded throughout the whole rig, interrupting the argument behind me. Julian, who had stepped over to the window, called out, "Hey, everyone might want to look at this. My rig definitely didn't have one of these." As we made our way over to the window, we watched as the crane rapidly reeled in its seemingly infinite supply of cable. Suddenly, from down below, we heard an enormous splashing sound, followed by a thud and a click that echoed through the rest of the structure. We quickly descended the stairs exiting the control room, and Julian rushed ahead of us, beckoning for us to follow him to the lowest platform. As I made my way down the last flight of stairs, my breath was taken away as the lander came into view. Its rusted exterior was encrusted with sea moss and barnacles. It was mounted to the pillars that descended into the moon pool below, seemingly functioning as an elevator shaft for the hidden transport. The cable that ran from the top to the crane up above was taut and tangled with all manner of sea plants. Printed in bold white lettering, partially rusted over and peeling but still legible, were the words Bully and H Submersible Facility, Level 0001. As we stood there awestruck, Savannah noticed a large red button on a pedestal next to the lander on the platform in front of us. Almost as if by instinct, she reached out and pressed it, and the doors of the lander slid open before us. Remarkably, it was entirely dry on the inside, with no hints of leakage anywhere to be seen. There were 3 rows of 5 seats each, arranged facing inwards towards the center of the lander. It was embarrassingly long before anyone had the courage to speak. Whatever was down there, whoever was down there was seemingly real. This was an entire portion of this facility that we weren't prepared for, maybe even the majority of the facility. But someone needed our help, right? I swallowed hard and asked my friends. So, are we getting in? As the doors to the lander sealed behind us, I sat down nervously on the pristine metal seat directly across the interior. The bulky box was robust, and although serviceable, its design far favored utility over comfort. We sat in the dark for only a brief second, as the overhead lights buzzed on. As they did, I turned to look over to Maria, who sat between Julian and I. Fearful tears ran down her face as she trembled. It hadn't taken much deliberation for us to decide we all should go down. The lander was clearly watertight, and if we got down to the bottom and decided that we weren't in a position to go on further, a control panel mounted to the door guaranteed we had the option to return to the surface at any time. Mark had suggested that maybe only a couple of us descended into the depths, but Savannah had pointed out that splitting up in an unknown situation like this was a far worse idea. It's not like we had long to deliberate anyhow. The voice on the broadcast had told us we didn't have any time to lose. A rumble. I felt the taut cord holding us up slack for a moment, dropping us maybe a few centimeters before I felt us begin to slowly lower. Maria let out a whimper, gripping Julian's arm as though she never intended to let go. Mark only winced, while Savannah seemed to almost be enjoying herself. After a few seconds, the cold rattle surrounding us stopped, and I felt the metal wall had rested my back against slowly turn cold to the touch. We had descended below the surface. No one spoke a word for the duration of the descent. The gravity of our situation wasn't lost on any of us. We had illegally trespassed on what was evidently some sort of hidden facility. If we had opted to ignore the voice, to choose not to try and help, then we either willingly let someone die to protect ourselves, or risked him surviving just to rat us out for being here, or worse. For the sake of our own skins and consciences, we had to do this, right? After several minutes, another jolt, and the submersible shuddered, groaning as it found a resting place. I felt the floor beneath my feet shift, as external locks docked our pod to some unseen structure below. Suddenly, a voice rang from the small PA speaker mounted in the corner of the room. It was grainy and warped as before, but the words could still be made out. All right, perfect. I knew you guys would come. Your capsule is connected to the facility's systems now, so I can wire in and guide you to me without having to depend on the radio transmitter. Here in a few minutes, the docking portal will finish its sealing process and the porthole will open in the middle of the floor in front of you. Careful, the ladder down will be slippery. Mark stood up out of his seat. Who are you? We're coming down to help if we can, but we need to know what we're getting into. What is this place? There was about 30 seconds of silence from the system before the voice hummed to life once more. I should mention, there's no microphones on your guy's end, so I can hear a word you're saying. There'll be cameras throughout the facility, so I can make sure you're heading the right direction. I'm going to make a guess, however, and say you're probably wondering who I am. I'll be honest, I don't have a satisfying answer for you yet, but I promise to explain everything I can when you get here. Good luck. Julian stood up suddenly. Nope, no way we're going any further with this weird shit. I didn't sign up for this. None of us did. I don't trust whoever the hell is talking to us, and neither should any of you. He moved to press the button that would return us to the surface, but before he could, an aperture opened in the middle of the room, trickling water slowly down into a hatch with a ladder. Julian rolled his eyes and pressed the button anyways. A buzzer beeped and an automated voice rang out from the PA above. Warning, unable to return to surface at this time. Please detach from dock at Subalvol 01. Surfacing will then commence after depressurization process completes. Estimated time to depressurization 28 hours. Savannah stood up out of her chair. Wait, 28 hours? It took us 5 minutes to get down here. What do you mean 28 hours? I winced. It's the pressure, I muttered. The deeper we go, the more time our bodies need to adjust before coming back up. I should thought of this before. So what? We just wait. Savannah snapped. If we go up too fast, I swallowed. Our blood starts to boil. Mark turned to me. That's a pretty big deal to just forget, man. If it's going to take a whole day and change just to go back up, that only leaves us 10 hours to go and get this guy and come back before the pilot swings back around. We definitely don't have enough food and water to last the extra week before his next try round. Maria stood out of her seat and quickly walked over to the ladder to begin her descent. We all sat looking at her for a moment before she spoke. Well, if we only have 10 hours, we better hurry. Come on. We each made the descent into the chamber at the bottom of the ladder. I was the last one down, and as I reached the floor below our feet, I examined our surroundings. We seemed to be at the end of a circular hallway. At the end, a set of stairs descended about 5 feet where a platform sat, and a bulkhead door waited for us. Mark, Savannah, and Maria had already begun to walk down the hall. As Julian turned to follow them, I grabbed his shoulder with my hand. Hey Jewel, we need to talk real quick. Now, we don't exactly have a lot of time, make it quick. I let his shoulder go and he turned to face me, his expression full of annoyance. Look, I don't think any of us want to be down here. This was supposed to be a fun trip, and now we're actually in some real potential danger. Yeah, no shit, dude, I didn't know that any of this was here. I'm in the same boat as you. I thought this was a normal rig like the one I was on. I know you do. That's why we brought you here. Remember, you were only allowed to come because you were useful, because you'd be able to pull your weight. But we're not in your territory anymore, so you have a different job now. Oh yeah, what's that, asshole? As long as we are down here, keeping Maria safe is your only priority. If shit hits the fan and I'm not able to protect her, I need you to swear with your life that you'll put her first. He softened, the anger on his face slowly washing away. Yeah man, of course. Same goes to you though. Of course. I'm glad we have an understanding. We quickly caught up to the rest of the group, who had made their way down the stairs and had opened the bulkhead door separating us from the rest of the facility. As we passed through, the overhead lights buzzed softly, casting long, flickering shadows. The air smelled old, damp, metallic. Somewhere deeper in the structure, I could hear the low hum of machinery, the steady churn of something big operating beneath our feet. We stood at the bottom of the access stairs, just past the bulkhead door. The passage ahead waited eagerly for us. Mark turned in a slow circle, his flashlight sweeping over the walls. Okay, there's no way that generator up top is running all this. Julian frowned, listening. Yeah, no chance. Maria glanced between them. Wait, what do you mean? Julian exhaled, shifting his pack. I mean, what we got running last night should barely been enough for emergency light and heat. That thing's been sitting for years. Mark crossed his arms. We figured it was a long shot, that even if we got it on, we weren't sure how long it'd last. Offshore rigs usually run on diesel, which doesn't go bad the same way gas does, so we hoped there was a chance the reserves would last long enough for our trip. Thought we got lucky. He gestured vaguely at the hall ahead. This is way beyond that. Maria blinked. But then where's the power coming from? Savannah raised an eyebrow. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say something down here. Julian exhaled through his nose, looking down the corridor. Has to be something bigger. Another power source. Something bigger. That phrase sat heavy in the air. Maria hesitated, then took a small step closer to me. So, is that bad? Nobody answered. Savannah grinned, sharp. Only one way to find out. She turned and kept walking. The rest of us hesitated, then followed. We walked for maybe 100 feet or so before a fork appeared in our path. The passageway opened into a larger chamber, where 3 hallways split off in different directions. A rusted sign bolted to the wall labeled them. Sublevel Maintenance Left Primary Research Wing. Right habitation and offices straight. Where to, mystery man? Julian muttered, looking around for a speaker or intercom. As if in response, an intercom in the corner of the room sputtered to life. The words were harder to make out than before, distorted and echoing. Whatever he was saying, it sounded intense, as though his message was urgent. Savannah tilted her head. Do any of you understand what he's saying? I can't make it out. The garbled speech cut out intermittently, and we stood puzzled, waiting for clarity on our direction. Amidst the static nonsense, my ear caught just one word. Right. You guys heard that too? Sounded like he said to go right. Mark furrowed his brow and peered down the corridor, leading to our right. Primary research, huh? Wonder if the poor bastard got stuck monitoring data. Maria lit up suddenly and pointed towards the floor leading into the research wing. Look, guys, footprints. Savannah pulled a flashlight out of her bag and illuminated the ground ahead. Indeed, tracks of briny water were faintly visible on the floor. They were difficult to make out in the dim lighting, but it appeared that whoever left them had been rushed, as several amorphous tracks weaved in and out of each other. As we traced the trail of water out of the hall, the path curved around, ending abruptly against the wall next to the hallway entrance. Shit, looks like maybe he's been here recently. Julian shone his own flashlight, peering down each of the hallways. I sighed. All of his tracks seemed to be coming or going from research. Plus he said right. Yeah, I think so. So right we go. The research wing stretched out ahead, a dim branching corridor lined with rusted pipes and corroded archways. The lights flickered more erratically than before, casting our warped shadows across the walls. The air was damp and stale, and something faint reeked the further we went in. We followed the water trail cautiously, our footsteps echoing against the steel floor. Somewhere behind the walls, machinery groaned and hummed, a constant torrent of noise that assaulted my ears and tightened our pace. Anyone else feel like we're walking into a damn haunted house? Julian muttered. Yeah, Mark said. Except you're not actually in danger inside a haunted house. Savannah snorted. Tell that to the idiot in a clown mask who accidentally punched me last year. Maria said nothing, her eyes darting nervously between the bolted doors we passed. The research wing had the feel of something abandoned hastily. In the few open doors we could see chairs knocked over, papers scattered on the floor, monitors flickering and displaying readouts. I couldn't even begin to understand. Bursts of static crackled through a nearby intercom, making all of us jump. The voice was still completely unintelligible, static and the growing sound of rushing water still drowning out meaningful speech. But the emotion behind it was far stronger, more desperate than before. Panic. Do not. As it cut once more, we all exchanged glances. What's he trying to say? Maria whispered. No clue. Is he hurt? Mark asked. Savannah shook her head. I don't know. He sounded frantic, scared. I swallowed, my throat dry. He said something about right before, but now he's saying. Do not, Julian finished. His voice was tight. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. The air felt heavier now, pressing in on my skin, making it harder to breathe. Mark pointed ahead. Looks like the water tracks continue up ahead, into that big door. Let's at least check it out before we decide to turn back. I wasn't sure we even had the option to turn back at this point, so onwards we went. It took 3 of us to open the massive door at the end of the hallway. As we breached its threshold, we found ourselves in an enormous cavernous room. It looked like a central hub for the research wing, a vast circular chamber with multiple exits leading off in different directions. The ceiling stretched at least 50 feet above us, lined with hanging cables and pipes. The walls were filled with observation decks, consoles, and what looked like vats, filled with an inky blue ichor. The entire room had a sickly rotting smell to it, the odor causing me to cover my nose upon entry. Condensation dripped from the ceiling, and the entirety of the floor was slippery with water. By far though, most striking feature was the pit in the center of the room. Taking up almost the entirety of the floor, a gaping maw descended impossibly deep, only muted darkness visible further down. Its sides were in plated steel, but solid, jagged rock. It dawned on me that this level of the facility must be mounted to the ocean floor. This cavernous hole bored directly into the seabed. The pit was surrounded entirely by robust guardrails, and snaking coils and wires rose from the darkness below, feeding into sensors and monitors all around the central rotunda. Hundreds of clear, pulsating tubes appeared to be siphoning the same blue liquid from the depths, slowly filling the vats in the room with the stuff. Mark whistled. Jesus. Maria inched closer to the pit's edge, peering down. How deep do you think it goes? Julian shook his head. No idea, but I don't like that we can't see the bottom. Whatever's down there absolutely stinks though. I moved toward the railing, gripping the cold metal, and squinted into the void. There was something about the way the cables draped into the abyss, like fishing lines waiting to pull something up. I stood staring into the void, and out of the corner of my eye I saw Maria, Julian, and Mark step away. We'll check this side of the room, Mark called. See if there's anything useful in those offices. It made me nervous to split up, but they were only on the other side of the pit. Guess that leaves us the left, Savannah said, nudging my arm. Come on. I hesitated, my gaze lingering on the pit. A part of me wanted to walk away from it, to ignore the gnawing sense of unease clawing at my chest. As I let go of the rail and turned to follow Savannah, something caught my eye, a movement in the depths. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The darkness down there was thick, suffocating, shifting slightly like fog over still water. But as I stared, I realized there was something in it, something moving, something rising. A shape, massive and sinuous, uncoiled from the depths like a snake. My breath caught in my throat as it breached the surface, a colossal, inky black limb, studded with glistening malformed sores, and riddled with thick pulsating tubes, sucking the blue substance from its mottled veins. A tentacle writhing and frantic, and it was reaching for Maria. I opened my mouth to scream, but the noise barely escaped my throat. My body locked in place, frozen in horror as the thing lashed forward. She barely had time to react. As she started to turn, eyes wide, mouth parting, then the tentacle struck. It coiled around her torso, squeezing tight with an awful wet crunch before yanking her off her feet. The air escaping her body warped her final scream, twisting it into a lifeless groan. The sound echoed, sharp and raw, as she was dragged beneath the pit's edge. Julian lunged forward, grabbing her outstretched arm, but the force was too strong. His fingers slipped, and she was pulled into the abyss. There was only silence, and she was gone. I stumbled back, heart hammering. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out the horrified shouts of the others. Savannah gripped my arm in a vice-like hold. Then, as suddenly as the tentacle had appeared, a blue flash filled the room, arising from the pit below. The whole chamber was flooded with it, a pulsing glow that lasted less than a second. It wasn't light, not exactly, more like a ripple in the air, a distortion that moved through the room. The air shimmered, thickening like a pressure wave before vanishing. The flash was the least of my focus, however, and I began to run, tears uncontrollably streaming down my face as I struggled to make haste towards where Julian and Mark were. "You promised me you'd protect her. I'll kill you. I swear I'll kill you." I approached the other side of the pit, stopping to wipe my eyes between sobs. As I looked towards the two of them with clarity in my vision, they stood, gawking at me as though I was crazy. Between them, Maria was back, standing exactly where she had been a moment before. "Dude, what the hell are you on about? Calm down." I stumbled forward, gasping for air, my mind reeling. I had just seen her die. I had seen her dragged into the depths. I had heard the breath squeezed out of her lungs. But here she was, alive. "Eli," Maria frowned at me. "What's wrong?" I stared at her, chest heaving. You were." A deep, hollow sound rumbled from the pit, and I saw Julian's eyes widen. I whipped around just in time to see the tentacle rise again, exactly as before. But this time, all of our eyes were locked on it. Exactly as before, the limb writhed with malice, before curling its slimy end and extending towards my sister. Before it could reach her, though, Julian braced himself, shoving her out of its path. As she fell to the side, the appendage recalculated, grabbing Julian instead. His strangled cry tore through the room as the thing yanked him off the ground, squeezing his chest with enough force. I heard his ribs crunch under the pressure. His eyes bulged, locked onto mine as the tentacle ripped him away, disappearing like lightning into the dark. In the panic, I realized that Mark and Savannah had already taken off, attempting to run to the door and slipping in their step on the wetted floor. I stooped down, reaching to pick up Maria, who was dazed on the ground. She was soaked in the salty, slime-tinged water covering the floor. As I got her to her feet, the others had made it to the door and were holding it open, screaming for us to hurry up and make it through. Through Maria's wails, I managed to put her arm over my shoulders and helped her stumble towards the door. Mark and Savannah had crossed back into the hallway, and I shoved Maria through the doorway before I went through. As I rushed to close the door behind me, another blue flash shot through the room. I turned, just in time to see Julian standing in the exact same spot as he had before, now alone. His expression one of sheer terror as the tentacle reached for him again. The door slammed shut between us, and the last thing I heard was his scream cut off with a blood-curdling snap. Mark held Savannah in his arms as she trembled, and Maria sat collapsed, inconsolable heap on the floor. We didn't have time to wait, though. We could stop when we'd made it to safety. I pulled her up, and we began to run back through the hallway from which we came. It only took a few minutes before we reached the junction from earlier, and we let ourselves stop. Savannah hyperventilated as Mark ran his fingers through her hair, his eyes wide as he stared blankly into the research hall. Maria sat against a wall, choking with every breath as tears streamed between sobs. The intercom crackled to life, the words finally audible again. No, 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 I told you not to go right. I told you not to go that way. I drowned out the incessant noise from the speaker and collapsed with my back against the wall. I stared blankly at the trail of water which had led us into the research wing, the trail that curled towards the wall and ended in the spot where my sister now sat crying. Drip. Precious time was slipping away, but none of us found the will to stand. Maria sat, still weeping for Julian. Mark's eyes never wavered from the cold corridor from which we had narrowly escaped advanced research. Savannah paced wildly, her breath frantic. I couldn't tell if the muttering under her breath was fueled with anger or fear. Drip. The voice over the intercom had died out. Whoever was on the other end must have seen from the camera in the junction that we had ignored its panicked ramblings since we'd arrived back at the intersection. Drip. Savannah paused her pacing, eyes locked on the steady drip that intermittently dropped from the ceiling above. Would someone please put a towel or a shirt or something on the floor? It's too loud in here. I need to think. I rolled my eyes and pulled a rolled t-shirt under my bag, throwing it on the floor where the drips were landing. She wasn't wrong though. In the silence left in the absence of conversation, the steady drip was deafening. It screamed into our ears, blasting the truth we'd been ignoring loud and clear. You are underwater. You are not safe here. Maria wiped her tears and stood up suddenly. I know you saw that too, Ellie. He was alive back there. He was back on the ledge. I'm going to get him. I sat back against the cold metal. He was back, yeah, but so are you. We're not going only for one of us to die again. Mark tilted his head, his eyes finally leaving the hallway to look at me. What do you two mean he's back? And I had it you mean she's back too. Exasperated, I let my head sink back, hitting the iron behind me. When she got taken first, dumbass. When that thing came and grabbed her first, took her down. Something reset, and she was back between you two. It reached up and grabbed Julian instead that time. When we were closing the door, it happens again, and Julian was on the platform alone. Mark gawked at me like I had two heads. What are you talking about, dude? Nothing ever came and grabbed Maria, it just got Jewel. Savannah's face scrunched. Mark, there's no way you didn't see it. She was right in front of you when she got taken. You and Julian tried grabbing her. By the time we ran over to you, she was back again. Mark and Maria exchanged a dumbstruck glance, and Maria stood up. That didn't happen. I just remember you running up to Joel screaming that you'd kill him, and he pushed me out of the way before it took him. Her eyes focused, fear immediately washing her face. Wait, you're saying that like Julian came back, that happened to me too? Yeah, you really don't remember? At all? Maria stood silent for a moment, eyes on the floor and mouth, moving but too shocked to speak. Savannah sighed, exasperated. So what now? At least right, there's now a way I'm going back to research. But we still have. She checked her watch. 7 hours, until it's too late to return to the surface in time. Mark's eyes locked onto her. You want us to stay down here? Are you kidding me? Hell no, we don't know what else is waiting down here for us. Your watch is busted, by the way. We only have 5 hours left. Are we even going to acknowledge the tree-sized tentacle that just crushed Maria's boyfriend to death? That thing down there, it shouldn't exist. We need to get out of here now. And just leave whoever is stuck down here alone to die? The voice sounded scared, Mark. We came down here to help, so we need to help. And risk ending up like Julian. Maria turned to Mark, fury in her teary eyes. You coward. You'd let him come down here and die for nothing? If whoever it is that's stuck down here knows how this place works, he'd be able to reset the loop again and bring him back. We need to keep going. We have to. Mark put his head in his hand. And if you're wrong, if the guy on the intercom decides he doesn't want to play nice, then we tried. We sat in silence for a while longer. Savannah resumed her pacing as Maria began to gather herself and prepare to continue. Mark sat, fuming in the corner. After a while, the speaker buzzed to life once again. Please hurry. I'm so sorry about your friend. I tried to warn you as best as I could. I tried warning you. My equipment. I'm running out of time. The water is up to my waist in here. I won't be able to use the intercom for much longer, and stick together this time. All of you. Mark was on his feet faster than I thought he could move. He stood in front of the speaker and screamed at it. Who the fuck are you? One of us just died because of you, and we don't even know if you were worth it. I need answers. Now. Savannah gently walked up behind him, placing her hand on his back. "He can't hear us, babe." Mark pushed her hand away and stormed up to the small camera on the other wall. He raised his hand to it, his middle finger raised in a message that the voice was sure to receive. The intercom buzzed to life again. I know. I'm trying here, I promise. But unless you come get me, Julian will be gone forever." Maria bolted to her feet. How did he know Julian's name? She ran over to the camera, shoving Mark out of the way. She screamed the words as loud as possible, moving her mouth in an attempt for the voice to read her lips. "How did you know his name?" The speaker laid silent for several long seconds before the speaker sighed. "Sublevel maintenance, Maria. I'm in sublevel maintenance. Please save me then, we'll talk." Maria didn't hesitate for a second and darted off, flashlight in hand, on the path towards our left. Savannah, already standing, took off after her, and it took me a second to stand as I began to chase her too. Mark stopped me, grabbing me by the arm as I moved to enter the dim maintenance hall. "We don't have time for this. We have less than 5 hours until it's too late to return to the surface." "Let me go, Mark. I have to go get my sister, and we have 7 hours, not 5. Mark loosened his grip on my arm. "Not by my watch. Go get them, and be back here in less than 15 minutes. There's nothing good waiting down that hall. I promise you. I'll be here waiting, but I'll be damned if I let anything back through that isn't you three." He released me, and I followed Savannah and Maria into the dark. I winced as I heard the bulkhead door separating the hall from the junction swing close behind me. I turned to see Mark look at me through the small window in the door. He pulled up his wrist and mouthed 15 minutes. Maintenance was structured very similarly to the research wing. One long central hall seemed to be the through line from which many branching rooms and halls spread. It didn't take long at all for me to catch up to Savannah, who herself had caught up with, and stopped Maria, who was begging to continue towards the voice. "No, please. You don't understand. He can help Julian. Whatever's going on here, he can help us. He can help. I need to get to him. Please let me go." I paused to look around. On a wall nearby, a camera sat pointed at us, a speaker directly adjacent. I walked over to the camera, gestured with my hands, spreading them apart and shrugging my shoulders as I mouthed the words, "How far?" The intercom buzzed to life. "Not very. If you hurry, there's a door marked Primary Pump Delta a bit further. I'm down there, about 2 levels down." I walked back over to the girls. "Hear that? He's close. Mark wants us back at the junction in 10 minutes though, and I think it'll take a little longer than that. Savannah, can you go back to him and let him know we need a little more time, but we'll be there soon?" She nodded and began to turn back before pulling Maria in for a hug. "We'll try to bring him back, girl. We'll try." My sister nodded, then took off. Before Savannah had even started walking away, Maria was sprinting down the dimly lit hall toward the stairwell labeled Primary Pump Delta. I cursed under my breath, taking off after her. The walls down here were even worse than the ones in research. Creaking metal encased us, rust creeping like veins along the welded seams. The flickering lights overhead barely made a difference against the thick darkness, and the distant grumble of machinery filled the air like a heaving breath. "Maria, slow the hell down," I hissed, to no avail. The intercom crackled again as we ran. "Almost there, end of the hall. Door on the right. I've lost camera coverage of you guys. But the good news is there should be service microphones up ahead. Let me know when you find the door marked triple bypass." We reached the bottom of the stairs in less than a minute. The words, "Primary Pump Delta Sublevel 02" were emblazoned on the heavy steel bulkhead in flaking white paint. Below, a bright red logo was stamped on the door, a familiar D. My stomach nodded. What did a pharmaceutical company like the Whitlam Hawthorne Group have to do with any of this? Maria didn't hesitate. She grasped the large manual valve on the door and twisted with as much force as she could muster. It groaned, scraping against rusted metal before giving way with a mechanical hiss. The door opened, and cold, damp air rushed out to meet us. The room ahead was tighter than the corridors behind, filled with tangled pipes and thick cables, moisture dripping off of every available surface. At the opposite end, a grated metal floor descended downward, forming another tight stairwell. Beyond it, darkness. We descended once more, and a sign above our heads read Sublevel 03. The walls were lined with old monitors, some still displaying static-drenched data. I walked over to the nearest one, still displaying readable text, but the words on it made no sense to me. Temporal phenomena, recurrence threshold 94%, Displacement stabilization incomplete. Please report anomalies. Containment field bypass requires triple synchronization. On-site subject 00 Delta. Pokolsovkana. Status stasis suspended. Maria startled me as she spoke behind me, also staring at the monitor. What the hell is this? I had no answer. Somewhere deeper, machinery groaned, rattling the floor beneath our feet. We need to get out of here, I said. Now. Maria shook her head. No. This place temporal phenomena. That means time right, like we could go back and save Julian. She stepped forward, peering down the next set of stairs. I clenched my jaw and followed. We emerged into a small chamber, more than before tiled in steel. At the far end, a locked door, thick and reinforced, a heavy pressure-sealed vault. A red panel sat beside it, 3 large valves mounted to the wall. Maria frowned. This must be the triple bypass he mentioned, right? The intercom buzzed to life. Next to it, a microphone grill sat blinking with red light. You're here. Good. The only way to open that door is to turn all 3 valves at the same time. Is a failsafe for keeping things out of here. I exchanged a glance with Maria. There's only 2 of us. Silence. Then the static. A heavy, trembling breath. Only 2? Yeah, I said. Savannah went back for Mark. The voice shattered. Oh my God. No. No. I told you explicitly not to split up. Get back upstairs, go now. Maria flinched, eyes wide. What's wrong? She's not safe. None of you are safe. This can't be happening. Not again. Hurry. I didn't wait. I grabbed Maria by the wrist and ran. Within 5 minutes we were back at the door that sealed off sublevel maintenance from the junction we'd been waiting in. I slammed through the cracked bulkhead door into the main intersection, panting. Empty. Mark was gone. Savannah was gone. Maria skidded to a halted stop beside me, panic creeping into her voice. Where are they? They didn't leave us, right? As if in response, a pained wail echoed through the hallway to our right, a raw, guttural sound that echoed down the corridor, the hall leading back to the lander. Savannah. Maria and I bolted toward the sound. The long corridor leading back to where we'd arrived stretched longer than I remembered. My own breathing was deafening in my ears. The wailing grew louder. We reached the end of the corridor, and in the dim light Savannah sat hunched up ahead. She was on her knees, sobbing hysterically, clutching something on the ground. I felt my stomach drop. No. The body was hollowed and dry, a husk skeleton, its flesh dried and clinging to brittle bones, its skull tilted unnaturally, its clothes unmistakable. Mark's clothes, Mark's backpack, Mark's boots. Maria screamed. Savannah collapsed against the wall, gasping between sobs. He was just here. He was just. Maria's hands trembled. No, I backed up, breath catching in my throat, my pulse roaring in my ears. I reached my hand out to brace myself against the wall, and rough marks scratched the palm of my hand. I looked at the wall next to me and stepped back in shock as dozens of tally marks sat scratched into the surrounding panels. Next to the tallies, scratched large into the wall, were the words I waited for days. You never came back. The scratch were rusted over, as if they'd been made decades ago. The silence was broken only by Savannah's uneven breathing and Maria's quiet sobs. The harsh glow of the maintenance corridor flickered intermittently, casting our solemn shadows dancing across the rust-stained walls. Savannah had stopped crying and now stared blankly into space, her face hollowed by grief and disbelief. Maria sat huddled nearby, her eyes red-rimmed and unfocused, mouthing a word over and over. Mark's body lay between us 3, evidently unmoved for years. None of us dared speak. Words felt useless. All that remained was the cold, creeping dread. I checked my watch again, though I knew that by now, time had ceased to mean anything. I thought back to Mark, his panicked insistence that we only had 5 hours left, even though we had closer to 7. I shivered at the thought, the nauseating truth slowly crystallizing in my mind. The distortions, the inexplicable shifts. Mark's body, a dry husk, only minutes old. Time was splintering, fracturing around us, and we were caught in its collapse. The intercom ahead crackled to life, startling us all. The voice was strained, exhausted, desperate. There was something more than fear in it this time. There was sorrow. I could hear them crying. Please, Please come back. I know you're hurt. I know it seems hopeless, but I think there's still a chance. You can still help me, and maybe I can still help you." Savannah's eyes snapped to the intercom, fury blazing behind her grief. "Help you? Help you. Mark is dead. Julian's dead. You promised us answers and safety, and now they're gone. What do you want from us?" Her voice cracked, breaking into choking sobs as she collapsed against the wall. The intercom sat silent for a long moment before the voice spoke again, almost a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I thought it would go differently this time. But please, I think things can still be made right. I need your help. Savannah, Maria, Elijah, we can make sure it goes right. We can make sure they never die." Maria's head shot up, her eyes suddenly clear, desperate hope cutting through the tears. She rose to her feet, her legs shaking, but decided, "You said that last time, and now both Julian and Mark they're dead. That can't just be undone." Static buzzed softly through the speaker, punctuated by the faint dripping somewhere far away. "You've seen it already," the voice said softly. "How time here is broken. We're caught in something we don't understand, but if you can get to me, then I can help. There's a console in the room. I'm in, and I think it controls the facility. I don't know how to use it, but together we might be able to fix it. Together, there's still hope." The speaker clicked off abruptly, leaving the three of us staring at the floor. Savannah looked hollow and defeated. Maria desperate. Both of them turned their heads my way, and I realized that now the decision fell to me. I swallowed hard, forcing down the lump of dread lodged deep in my throat. My voice trembled. "We don't have a choice," I said. "We could leave now, but 28 hours in the lander could become 1,000 years, and we'd just end up like Mark, or we move forward. Maybe we can, I don't know, go back and save them. Maybe we have a chance, but only if we keep going." Savannah's face darkened, defiance struggling against despair. After a long pause, she stood shakily, tears still streaming down her cheeks. I can't leave Mark here. Not like this." Maria moved closer, placing a gentle hand on Savannah's shoulder. She gave me a look, and I sighed. I stooped down to the ground, gently picking Mark up. His withered corpse was much lighter than I'd expected, dried and lacking all substance. I stood and silently made our way to the junction we'd now crossed several times before. Savannah trailed behind as I carried him down the unexplored corridor straight ahead, marked as habitation. It didn't take long to find a suitable place to lay him to rest. A door to our right lay cracked open, and inside was what appeared to be a communal bedroom. One bed stood out among the rest, positioned neatly in the middle of the room, illuminated by a single light from above. The sheets were dusty and ragged, but neatly laid across the bed. Maria gently lifted the sheet, coughing as a cloud of ash and dust arose from beneath, tattered and rotted clothes filling the space under the sheets. Savannah gently removed Mark's boots, and I laid Mark down in the bed, amidst the ash and the tattered rags that matched his. Savannah went to place the boots in the corner of the room, where dozens of identical pairs in varying states of decay already lie waiting. As I gently covered up his body with the sheets, I prayed that this was the last time he'd need to be laid to rest here. Together in heavy silence, we retraced the steps we'd made through the twisting labyrinth of the maintenance corridors. Rusted pipes and warped metal walls seemed tighter with every step we took back toward the triple bypass chamber. Every sound echoed our footfalls, our breathing, even our heartbeats reverberated around us, amplifying the tension that etched away at my nerves. Finally, as we descended the final set of stairs, the bypass chamber lay ahead of us, its heavy reinforced door waiting ahead. The room beyond and the voice trapped within waited in silence. The three valves, spaced evenly apart, stared back at us. "Okay," I said softly, forcing a shaky confidence I didn't feel. "Savannah, Maria, and I made it down here before, and to get through each of those needs to be turned simultaneously. It's the only way forward. I'm guessing the pressure will force the door open fairly quickly, so get out of the way as soon as you can. On three, we turn." We moved into position. Maria on the left, Savannah on the right, me at the center. My palms were slicked with cold sweat as I gripped the rusted wheel. 1. I heard a small sob from Savannah. 2. Maria closed her eyes, mouthing something silently. Julian's name. 3. The valves turned, metal grinding against rusted joints, groaning in protest until something within the walls clicked into place. A loud hiss echoed through the chamber as ancient locks disengaged. We backed away quickly, waiting for the door to swing open before us. The door cracked slightly for just a moment, and cold, damp air rushed out, filling the room with the smell of salt and decay. As it did, my stomach lurched, as a familiar blue shimmer shot through the air. As I blinked, I gasped in shock to find myself when I stood seconds prior, immediately in front of the door. As the door creaked and begun to swing open rapidly, I leapt back just in time to see another flash pass through Savannah and Maria. Maria shimmered in the air for a second, similarly reappearing where she had stood opening the valve. She didn't have enough time to react, and as the door burst open, it slammed into her, knocking her off her feet and sending her flying before she landed with a dull thump on the steel floor. As I ran over to aid her, I turned back towards the door. I wish I hadn't. Savannah had similarly been reset in her position, her body where it had been when Shed turned the knob. Occupying the same space, however, was the immense metal door that had swung out. Her outstretched arm twitched, poking through the solid metal like a tree emerging from the ground. Her face, half swallowed up by wrought steel, locked in a gasp. Her eye locked onto me before spiraling into a spasm as a trickle of blood began to run out of her exposed nostril. The intercom crackled frantically, the voice barely audible through thickening static. "The loop is destabilizing. You have to get in here now. There's no more time." I turned back Maria and attempted to rouse her from the floor. Her skin was cold to the touch, and as I felt for a pulse, I could discern a weak, unsteady heartbeat. "Maria, please wake up. We have to go now, please." No response. I looked towards the outstretched door. Inside was our last chance at fixing this. We couldn't wait a second longer. I pulled Maria into a fireman's carry and trudged towards the outstretched door. As we crossed through it, it slammed shut behind us, and I heard its 3 mechanical locks click shut. The room inside was almost as cavernous as the one we'd encountered in the research wing, its high ceiling swallowed by shadows. Countless monitors flickered around us, screens cycling through meaningless data and distorted video feeds. Thick bundles of cables snaked along the floor, disappearing into a pit almost as large as the one that had swallowed Julian up. Immensely large pumps filled the room, some pipes siphoning from the depths below, while others passed through the wall to whatever chamber lay ahead. Across the way there was another heavy bulkhead, emblazoned with familiar white letters, Temporal Anomaly Containment, Observation Deck. The terminal beside it blinked urgently. I carried Maria across the hall, and without hesitation I moved to the control panel, hands shaking as I attempted to access the observation deck from where the voice called out. A new warning flashed on screen, bright red. Containment compromised. Observation deck flooding imminent. Manual override required. As I stared at the screen, the intercom hissed to life, frantic now. "Through the door. Hurry. And in here. Activate the purge and get inside. Please. It's almost too late." I slammed my fist on the override. The chamber shook violently, alarms blaring as all the pumps in the chamber shook violently and began furiously pumping water into the pit below. Beside me, Maria coughed suddenly, her body shaking against the wet floor as she began to seize. I rushed to her side, lifting her gently, panic rising in my throat as I found her pulse become more erratic, her breathing shallow. "No, Maria, come on, stay with me," I shouted desperately, but she lay unresponsive in my arms. I turned back to the intercom, fury eclipsing my fear. Did you know that I'd be the only one to make it this far? Has this all happened before?" The voice crackled back, broken and defeated. "I'm sorry, please. Just open the door." Rage overtook me. A boiling, uncontrollable anger. "I won't let this happen again. I can't let you live." My hand hovered over the control, hesitating and trembling, then slammed onto the flood control override. The pumps paused for a moment, and I heard them roar back to life, pumping water back into the small room. Water roared violently behind the bulkhead door, overwhelming the speakers, drowning out the voices' anguished screams. I waited until the room fell quiet again. Then, with numb fingers, I reactivated the pumps. Slowly the floodwaters receded behind the sealed door, leaving the chamber silent once more. The door hissed open, and with Maria limp in my arms, I stepped inside. She was cold in my arms, her head resting against my shoulder, her breath slow and faint. The observation deck was quiet. Water pooled in shallow layers across the floor, sloshing beneath my boots as I stepped forward. The monitors inside still hummed with life, bolted to the floor and walls, seemingly waterproofed. Banks of equipment lined the walls, lights blinking in slow, useless rhythms. A ring of thick conduit cables fed into a central pedestal at the center of which stood a chair, its frame dripping with more of that strange blue fluid we'd seen in the research wing. It oozed from the machinery like blood from a wound, seeping across the floor and spiraling through the water like octopus ink. Everything here smelled of salt, copper, and something sweetly rotten. And then I saw them. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze mid-step. Floating in the far corner of the room were two bodies, face down on the floor in a swirling pool of that blue ichor, like insects in amber. The nearest one was wearing my clothes. I walked over, steps unsure with shaky breath. I stared down at my own drowned face, eyes wide and blank, a tangle of dark hair waving in the shallow water like seaweed. Next to the other me, her hand barely touching mine, was another Maria. I staggered back, nearly slipping on the wet floor as I felt my body lurch to vomit, disgust surging through me. I looked down at the Maria I carried, real, injured, but breathing, and then back at her lifeless corpse. This had already happened, and it was happening again. Or hadn't happened yet. I didn't know anymore. None of it made sense. Things were folding in on each other like houses in a storm. Julian, Mark, Savannah, me, Maria. We'd all been here before. We were here now, and maybe always. I set Maria gently down into the chair, brushing her wet hair from her forehead. Her pulse was still weak, but steady. I glanced up at the camera in the corner of the room, blinking slowly through condensation. It was several hours before I couldn't stand to look at our own bodies anymore. With effort, I hoisted them up and pushed them into the pit that lay in the chamber behind me. It wouldn't matter. There would be another chance. That wouldn't be me. My hands trembled as I sat at the terminal beside the chair. The keyboard was stiff, half of the keys jammed with salt and rust. I wiped the screen with my sleeve, and a prompt appeared. Satellite uplink standby, connection active, online messaging on standby. I stared at the cursor, blinking back at me, and I began to type this all out. I don't know who will find this, or when, or if anyone even can. My name is Elijah. I came here with my old Urbex group, Mark and Savannah, my sister Maria, her boyfriend Julian. We were just supposed to explore a rig, one last big adventure. I've watched them all die, one by one, some more than once. Time is broken here. It loops, collapses. But it always ends the same. I think I've reached the end now. The chamber is starting to flood again. The water's creeping up past my boots. Maria's still unconscious beside me. I think she's breathing. Maybe this time she'll wake up before it fills the room. I want to believe. Well, get out. I want to believe this isn't the end. But if it is, if this message somehow gets out, if this upload reaches you, whoever you are, don't come looking. Don't follow the signal. The pumps are failing again. In looking at the monitor beside me, flickering with the video feeds of the facility, as I write this, something is catching my eye. One of the feeds is labeled Cam 01, surface platform. I can see the helicopter. I can see us unloading our bags. Tiny on the screen, just dots on the helipad, but I'd know us anywhere. Mark, Julian, Savannah, Maria, and me. We've just landed and we're laughing, alive. I'm watching myself comfort my sister as she stares out into the blackness of the sea. I know they won't be able to hear me until the morning when they go to check the broadcast I'm sending to the control deck up top, but I know that I'm going to ask for their help. I'll warn them of everything that I think they'll understand, as little as that would be. I'll do my best to get them down as quickly as possible to rescue Maria and I down here. Maybe this time they'll listen to me. Maybe this time will be different. My school field trip was ruined by prehistoric fauna. I've studied biology for years. I was always interested in the way animals behave and why they do the things they do. I hoped I could use my knowledge in biology to pursue a future of paleontology. I couldn't find a job that could pay well and let me use my knowledge on prehistory. This is my final year in college, and I still haven't found a proper path to take. I felt like every human was born with a specific trait. Some were born smart, some were born strong, some a mix of both. I don't think of myself as a smart person. I possess rational thinking skills and a good understanding of animal behaviors. I was born with an obsession with prehistoric life. I was fascinated by genetic behaviors hardwired into animals based on ancient memories of trial and error. If I remember correctly, those are innate behaviors. Adrenaline could revert man into a feral beast fueled by the hope of survival. Those ideas couldn't help me work a 9-to-5 job at a retail chain. I could never use my knowledge to better myself. I began to loathe my curse. Wonder only brought you so far. However, my fascination would later become a convenience. I can't begin to describe how strange this situation came to be. I hope whoever reads this has a good laugh though. Biologists and paleontologists are probably laughing at my testimony. At this point, believing me or not doesn't matter, as that isn't what I should be talking about. I don't remember all their names, or if they had family. I regret it. It was on a Friday afternoon, while my classmates were eager to get home after enduring a grueling week of exams. I headed to the science lab to meet up with the professor. Our professor, Mr. Princeps, had organized an event for me and a select few to go on a field trip to Costa Rica. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say I was shaking with anticipation. I had no girlfriend to spend my summer with, no job to attend, and my parents were busy with work. They decided to give me some money to pay for the trip. Professor Princess studied the classroom of eager students. Unlike most school trips, we would not gain any sort of extra credit or reward. We simply went on this trip for the love of biology. A student I didn't recognize tapped the tip of his pencil against the laminated plastic desk, smudging the gray chalky substance as he moved his arm. Princess adjusted his rectangular glasses and opened a tin can of breath mints. "I'm glad you could all make it here today," Princess said, smiling. "This is the largest number of students to join me on our annual trip so far. I am honored to be your guide on our trip to Costa Rica." He beamed through his bushy gray mustache. "I've heard from my partner that they're doing some kind of new experiment with birds, but I don't know much about that yet. Anyway," he slowed, noticing he was starting to rant. The class stared at him with anticipation. I raised my hand. "Yes, Luke," the doctor said. His attention turned to me. I cleared my throat, eager to learn more. "What kind of experiment with birds?" "Well, I don't know much, but," Professor Princeps explained. "But I do know that they're bringing large bird species in from other continents, I think to see how they adapt to the humid climate." I scratched my head. I was going to ask another question, but I decided to let it rest. I didn't want my classmates to get mad at me. "That settles it, Ben," the professor said. "I hope to see you all at the airport tomorrow." I parked my old beaten car far away from the entrance to avoid traffic. I noticed a few of my other classmates getting out of their cars. Some all got out of one car. They must convince their friends to join the trip. In retrospect, I'm glad I never brought any of my friends. As excited as I was for this trip, being in a new environment with a bunch of strangers didn't sit right with me. I dragged my luggage through the automatic doors and adjusted the backpack resting on my shoulder. I saw Professor Prince surrounded by at least 7 other students. I went to join the group. The next day wasn't very interesting or memorable. I went through customs, dealt with TSA, and headed to the gate. Our group all sat relatively close to each other. I sat next to a student with dark curly hair and glasses. Beads of sweat dripped down his neck. "Scared of flying?" I asked him. He scratched his skinny arms and looked at his lap. "A little," he said, lying. "You know, you're more likely to die driving to the airport than actually crash," I said reassuringly. "Gee, thanks," he said sarcastically. "Everyone's heard that one." "So, you're just scared of flying," I said, trying to fix our conversation. "Yeah, I don't really care about statistics. I just don't like it," the guy said, twirling his jet black curls. "That's fair. Anyways, what's your name? I don't think I have any classes with you," I said in a friendly tone. "My name is Matthew. I don't attend most of my biology classes because I already know everything," he said. "Whatever helps you sleep at night," I said, hoping he wouldn't notice. I decided I needed to at least understand the guy. Matthew, I mean. "So Matthew, what video games do you play?" I asked him. "Video games? I usually play retro Sega games on the Genesis console." I was trying my best not to judge him. This man was overly pretentious, but at the same time I respected his choices. "I'm just gonna sleep through this one," I said quickly. I did exactly that. When I woke up, my whole body was stiff. I stretched my legs and popped my knees as far as I could in the small space available to me. We exited the plane. The humid climate felt like walking into a bathroom after someone took a shower. I tugged on my shirt collar. We were all loaded onto buses and transported to the camp. I walked along the side of my bus, inhaling the hot fumes and hearing the loud rattling of the engine. I noticed a dead animal on the dirt road. It must have been some type of bird. I decided to avoid it so I wouldn't get sick. I sat in the back of the bus while everyone else talked with their friends. We eventually pulled up to the campsite and exited the bus. "All right, class, put away your things," Princeps said, pointing to the large tent-like building. "When you're settled, follow the signs and make your way to the Discovery Center. We are about to miss something special." I hurried and put my suitcase under my bed. I was lucky to have the bottom bunk. It wasn't a privilege. I was just stubborn and preferred being close to the floor in case I roll out of the bed. As we entered the lab, a bearded, olive-skinned man in a lab coat greeted us. Dr. Prince introduced him as his friend, Dr. Harding. Dr. Harding stood before a table with eggs, incubating in an advanced device. "What we are witnessing, gentlemen, is the hatching of a baby king vulture. The nest was abandoned, so I took it in. It's a miracle that the eggs survived this long without a mother," Dr. Harding said, his voice oozing with excitement. "Shush, it's hatching," Princeps said, hushing the class. The tall bleach-white egg shook and cracked, crumbling to pieces to reveal the hatchling. The featherless chick, coated in the egg's fluids, slowly moved out of the shattered shell. Harding collected the shattered eggshell and threw it away. He gently picked up the hatchling and showed it to the class. The class talked in hushed whispers. "Where is its beak? Is that a claw? That's too big to be a vulture, right?" I looked down at the chick, pushing past the crowd. My blood ran cold. On its leg, above where the talons would be, was a fully pronounced dromaeosaurid sickle claw. "That," I said, baffled, "is not a vulture." Dr. Harding turned to Professor Princeps and gave him a look I couldn't understand. Princeps pulled his cell phone out of his pocket and sent a text to an unknown number. Since we got to the camp late, we didn't have much time to explore our new home. I sat in bed staring up at the top bunk. The other students in my dorm room were fast asleep. Some were snoring. I couldn't get the thought out of my head. I had to see it. At around 12 o'clock in the morning, I crept out into the main area. The camp consisted of many buildings surrounded by an outdoor garden. I walked through the dark garden, listening to the croaking sounds of frogs and the calls of birds. I noticed an exhibit with a bird symbol over the door. I was confident they moved the hatchling into that exhibit. My hands reached the handle when I was confronted. "And what are you doing up this late?" A cunning male voice said from behind me. I turned to see a tall Asian man with messy black hair. His lips were twisted into a smug grin. I held my hands over my head and closed my eyes. "I guess you caught me, camp counselor, or whatever your job is. What's my punishment?" I proclaimed unenthusiastically. "Don't worry, you don't have to apologize. I know exactly what you want to do," he said, looming over me. My heart pounded. "What might that be?" I said, trying my best to conceal my fear. "We get your types every year. I understand completely. Everyone has the right to learn. You're just eager to see the animals up close, right? I was exactly like you when I was younger," he said in a warm tone. His voice seemed passive-aggressive, but I couldn't really tell because of its higher tone. I looked him up and down nervously. "You're not doubting me, are you?" he asked, pulling me from my internal debate. No, I wouldn't do that," I stuttered. "Good to hear. I'll give you 20 minutes. If I don't see you back in your dorm by then, I'll send you home," he said, his eyes piercing into my soul. I nodded understandingly. I watched as he walked back to the employee dorms as I entered the unlocked lab. There were many enclosures holding animals from toucans to ostriches. Why were ostriches here? I made my way to a concrete lab bench with a tall birdcage on top. Inside was the hatchling. I crouched to get a better look at it. There was a plastic syringe full of mushed nutrients next to the cage, but it does not look like it has been used. I walked outside and snatched a beetle off a leaf. I went back inside, opened the cage, and gave the hatchling the beetle. The hatchling stood up and wobbled towards the insect. I was stunned. A bird alive for less than 12 hours was already walking. I wasn't sure if birds were even able to do that. Even so, I knew that animal was not a bird. The hatchling scooped up the beetle and crunched it in its teeth. Its head bobbed as it crept into a corner and ate, eyes never breaking contact with mine. Its eyes were not bird-like. They were bright orange with a yellow tint. It reminded me more of a lizard than anything. A wing fell from the hatchling's mouth. The hatchling ruffled its quill-like proto-feathers, wiping the guts off of its face. I must admit that at the time, the hatchling was adorable. I'm not sure if it was that big when it hatched though. No, I'm absolutely certain of it. That animal has grown at least a few inches. In order to do that, it would have to eat huge amounts of food, but it doesn't look like it's eaten anything besides the beetle. It couldn't be a bird. Its skin was too thick and scaly. The body was too long and slender for a hatchling vulture. It barely even had a beak. It was more akin to some sort of reptile. The best way to describe it was prehistoric. 115 million years ago, Deinonychus went extinct. Somehow, maybe by pure chance or by the actions of man, Deinonychus has been born once more. If I told you the morning went better, I would be lying. We all woke up from our shallow slumber. I felt like I slept on a pile of rocks. The dorm room's walls had faded, peeling paint. The ceiling light had a barely noticeable buzz. All the small inconveniences all piled on to make my morning hard to get used to. I rushed through breakfast at the cafeteria. I felt a chill run down my spine as I ate a hashed brown. Turning around, I set my gaze on the counselor I encountered last night. His bright silver eyes felt like cameras waiting to catch a criminal. I couldn't tell if he was smiling or sneering at me. I finished my food and washed it down with a swig of orange juice. I excitedly rushed to the birdhouse as soon as I could. The cage wasn't just empty, it was destroyed. The cage door had been ripped off. The glass door was shattered. The bird seemed alert and stressed. An African gray parrot ruffled its feathers and bobbed its head. "Class," the bird said in a monotone voice. "Project. Class. October." It recited random words, bobbing its head excitedly. Before I even realized it, the whole camping crew was in the room with me, trying to figure out what happened. My classmates were distraught at the loss of their new pet. They eventually settled on the bird escaping. However, I knew that wasn't the case. The cage had been ripped open from the outside. I decided to tell them my theory and see what could have happened. Back when we were ignorant, we believed a monkey had somehow broken in and ate the hatchling. Howler monkeys were known to trample the garden and steal the various fruits grown by the staff. They kept their distance from humans, but that didn't stop them from causing problems. A monkey breaking into a building on the campsite was unheard of unless a window was left open near the canopy. Due to the lack of residue from the hatchling, it was likely carried away instead of eaten on the spot. Everyone started to exit the bird room. I walked closer to the African gray parrot and watched it as it climbed around its massive cage with its feet and beak. It grabbed a twig, lodged it under the cage door, and pushed it open. It climbed out of the cage and flew on top of a tank. It looked at me, tilted its head, and made a strange calling sound. It used its feet to scratch its neck. "Hi, bird," I said in an adoring tone. "Hi, bird," it repeated in the same tone of voice. The parrot grabbed a nut and hobbled over to a bowl and dropped it in. The parrot danced and clanged its beak against the bowl, its intelligent eyes watching me with anticipation. "Treat," it said. I opened a few drawers and found a bag of sunflower seeds. I opened the bag and the parrot immediately landed on my arm and scarfed down the seeds. I quickly shut the bag and put it back in the drawer. A primitive mechanical device beeped, opening a door behind the ostrich enclosure, allowing them to go outside and roam in their pen. As I was walking back to the cafeteria to receive a briefing on daily activities, I was confronted by the counselor, who then introduced himself as Ezekiel. "I don't think you broke the door or stole the hatchling. I am going to make that very clear," Zeke told me. "However, that does not clear your name in this event. Nobody else knows you went in the bird room last night." I nodded as he continued. "I do want to know one thing. Did you see anything when you left the bird room?" I pretended to think, but I already knew I had nothing to tell him. "No, I don't recall anything suspicious." Zeke looked me in the eye. "Well, Luke, I believe you. I'm willing to put my faith in your testimony. I had nothing to worry about because I was telling the whole truth." The first day went by quickly. We went ziplining and hiking through nature trails. A guy named Isaac demonstrated his expert tree climbing skills. Professor Princess had to stop him from grabbing a bird nest 20 feet off the ground. When we arrived back at the campsite, we were all given tie-dye shirts in traditional camp fashion. The bright colors gave me a headache. I stepped over a branch when Dr. Harding held his hand out, stopping me from moving forward. "Ants," he said. I looked down at a colony of small black ants clustered around a tree. "These are bullet ants. Don't touch them," he told the group. They all live with the same directive: feed the colony. These ants use swarm tactics to overwhelm their prey, then they use their immense strength to pull the corpse back to the colony. Harding lectured. And of course, if they manage to bite you, it won't stop hurting until the next day, if you're lucky. I reached down to scratch the weird tickling feeling on my leg. Right before my nail made contact with my skin, I noticed the unmistakable shape of an ant. Without thinking, I swiped it off my leg. I almost sighed with relief when I noticed the ant crawling on my hand. I squealed like a toddler and brushed my hands together. I couldn't find the ant after that. On the second day, we went on a hike to a creek. Once we made our way to the sea, we all boarded a canoe in groups up to 3. I got a boat with the most unathletic people I've ever met. I did most of the heavy lifting, paddling us through the dim jungle. The creek was covered by the jungle roof. Try not to get your hands in the water. We sometimes find caiman around this area, Dr. Harding said. Unfortunately, it was difficult to enjoy the scenery, as I was straining my muscles to pull 2 skinny guys who held the paddle sideways. Suddenly, the oar was pulled into the water. I tried my best to win the tug of war, but I lost my grip. The oar swung overboard, smacking into my temple as it plunged into the water. "The hell," the kid behind me said. "Why'd you drop it?" I sneered. "I didn't drop it, something pulled it in." I hissed at him, already agitated from straining myself. He gave me a confused look. "What do you mean?" I repeat myself. Something pulled my oar into the water, and I can't get it back. I suddenly had a realization. "What's the depth?" "Sorry," the kid asked. "What's the depth of the river right now?" I repeated. "Oh, the depth is," he said, examining the device implanted into the side of the canoe. "It says 4 meters. "Are you sure?" "I think my oar could have been stuck on the riverbed," I told him. "No, wait, it says 2 meters now," he said with a look of concern. "That's not possible, we're in the middle of the creek. It doesn't get shallow here," I said. 1 meter now. My eyes widened in realization. A large object collided with the bottom of the canoe. I could hear the hard plastic scrape against a rough surface. We huddled towards the middle of the canoe as it rocked wildly. A massive shape traveled below the surface of the river, barely disturbing the water. It moved sluggishly as it traveled along the light current. "Is that a crocodile?" the guy behind me asked. "No, it's too big," I said, confused. "Could it be a saltwater crocodile then?" he asked. "Those things live in Australia. I doubt they would migrate here," I said, unsure. The tail propelled the creature, causing a small ripple in the water. The animal shook its head. A moment later, the oar resurfaced, snapped in half. I quickly grabbed the oar and examined the damage. The guy in front of me widened his eyes. "What did that?" I held out my hand. "Give me your oar. We aren't going to sit here all day." On the 3rd day, we were allowed to go free roam and find fruit to bring back to study. We were warned of dangerous species of ants and other insects. I opted to walk by a stream, hoping plants could grow next to the water source. I noticed a large mango tree hanging over the stream, but something was off. The mangoes were the size of watermelons. I watched as one snapped from the weak branch and hit the ground with a wet thud. The roots of the mango tree had visible purple veins that were brighter when closer to the water. "Guys over here," I shouted. I looked around the empty forest. "Is anyone here? You have to see this," I shouted again. "Over here." I desperately wanted someone to see these strange fruits. I decided to grab one and carry it back. It felt like it was going to pop at any second, as the mango was not meant to be that size. The stem was oozing a purple substance. Then I heard something from behind me that I'll never forget. "Over here." The voice was deep and scratchy, as if someone were to talk after being sick for weeks. It sounded guttural, like it wasn't coming from vocal cords. Like a parrot. "Over here," it said again. I slowly turned around and dropped my melon-sized mango. Thud. Here. I was standing face to face with a prehistoric predator. I froze. I didn't even breathe. Fiery orange eyes. Sleek feathers. It was about as tall as my rested elbow. Its body was coated in gray and white feathers, excluding the head, which sported black feathers. The muzzle lacked any sort of plumage, but made up for it with bright red scaly skin. Over its eyes sported protruding eyebrow feathers that occasionally flared up. The Deinonychus bobbed its head. I held my breath and stood still. It tilted its head to the side curiously. It inched closer, its sharp toe claws digging into the loose soil. The sunlight filtered through the trees, causing the light to refract off the feathers like a kaleidoscope. "Over here," it barked again. "Over here." I repeated in an exhausted exhalation. Its eyebrow feathers raised as its head perked up with newfound curiosity. It inched closer. I raised my hands over my head like a bear. The Deinonychus backed away, intimidated. The theropod balanced on a bipedal stance, elegantly, walking backwards without stumbling. The tail readjusted as it walked. The dinosaur waved its tail feathers in a slow, hypnotic motion and hissed softly. In the blink of an eye, the Deinonychus dashed away into the thicket, carrying a mango melon with it. I wanted nothing more than to announce my victory, but I decided to grab a mango and take it back to the camp. The trip back was nothing short of a journey. The mango, which weighed at least 8 pounds, was hard to hold on to, especially given its strange proportions. I had to travel uphill, my tendons straining as I scaled the elevated path. When I reached the campus, I shifted the mango into one hand and opened the door. "You're late, Lucas," Professor Princeps said. The other students looked at me in confusion. "What is that in your hand?" Princeps asked. "Oh, this," I asked, remembering the fact I was carrying something. "It's a mango." The crowd exchanged confused glances. "That isn't a cantaloupe?" someone whispered. "Hand it to me, Luke," Princeps said warmly. The professor grabbed the melon-sized mango. He sat it down on a table and cut into it with forceps. Thick, purple liquid bled from the fruit. "I must say, Mr. Luke, this is an interesting specimen," the professor said. I nodded my head in agreement. "Are you sure this is a mango?" he said. "It looks more like a decaying cantaloupe." "But what is this purple ooze?" he said, examining the liquid stuck between his fingers. He pulled a piece off the mango and took a bite out of it. The class was shocked, concerned about the risk of the fruit being toxic. "This thing tastes absolutely delicious," Princeps said in awe. "It's sweeter than candy. The texture feels like biting into a giant block of honey." Princeps turned to me. "Lucas, where can I find more of these?" he asked, anxiously waiting for my answer. "That's the hard part," I said morosely. "I want you all to take me very seriously. There is a bird, a large flightless bird. It was there when I found the tree. It could be very dangerous." I decided that, although it could be helpful to tell them what kind of animal it was, I wouldn't. If they didn't believe me when I told them it was a dinosaur, they would assume the rest of my story is also false. I didn't want anyone to go looking for the tree and getting hurt. Professor Princeps thanked me for giving them helpful information. "All right, class," he announced. "Let's move on to the next station, insect identification." The class began to pack up and leave. As I started to walk out the door, he called for me. "Everyone can leave except for Luke. Everyone can leave except for Luke." I froze. Professor Princeps never talks in that serious tone. When the laboratory was empty, he ate a breath mint and cleared his throat. "Tell me, Luke, was there anything else of importance you would like me to know?" "Anything at all?" he said seriously. "There was one thing. The roots of the mango tree were siphoning water from a stream. The roots had strange purple veins, the same shade as the liquid sap inside the mango." Princeps paused for a moment. His demeanor suddenly changed, as if he had thought of something he forgot to do. "Damn it, Harding," he muttered to himself. "This might seem like an odd question, but are you familiar with tectonic plates?" he asked me. "Yes, I know they cause earthquakes." He chuckled. "Indeed they do. However, what is under those plates? What is buried deep in the mantle of our planet? For all we know, you could dig up the wrong rock and contract anthrax. It's just too complicated." "What are you getting at?" I asked, genuinely curious. "It's just a hunch, but maybe these fruits are a product of this river. Maybe the water is an invasive pathogen or virus of some sort," he explained. Something about his confidence told me that he didn't come up with that theory on the spot. "If you believe that, I guess I'll tell you one more thing," I said finally. "Go ahead," he smiled. "The animal that I met at the tree was the dromaeosaurid known as Deinonychus antierhopus." The professor laughed. It wasn't a mocking laugh. It was a laugh of excitement and eagerness. His face softened. "I want to see this tree," he said to me. "I refuse to tell you the location," I said, regretting the words as they left my mouth. "Why not?" he said, disappointed. I told him that it wasn't safe, especially because of how unpredictable wild animals are, especially when under the influence of whatever is in the stream. "I have weapons that can turn a goddamn T-Rex into a pile of flesh, and not scared of a bird." As much as I hated to admit it, I wanted nothing more than to go back to the site of the stream. I sighed and accepted, telling him I would be his guide. The professor smiled. "I'm glad you came to your senses. Think of what we could accomplish out there. We could name a species after us. Imagine it. Deinonychus jacoblucensis." "No, absolutely not," I said with certainty. He frowned like a child denied a toy. "Can I go too?" a voice suddenly asked. We both turned to look at the speaker. It was a woman from my class. Before you?" I asked, dumbfounded. "Where did you come from?" Professor Princess said. "My name is Elizabeth." She smiled, ignoring the second question. She had blonde, curly hair, and freckles. She was about my height, which is a little over 510. "Why do you want to go?" I asked. "I'm bored." "You're bored? You're in a damn jungle. How the hell can you be bored?" I raised my voice, offended at her downright blasphemous remark. "Calm down, Luke." Princeps silenced me and turned to the girl. "Elizabeth, I'm afraid I have to deny you this trip. It isn't safe." "Please let me go. I'll do anything," she begged. I couldn't help but notice that she somehow hid without anyone seeing her colorful sweater the entire time. I wanted to ask her if she was hot wearing that, but it wouldn't be very relevant. The sun began to set as we debated. "Look, it's getting late, let's just stop chatting, shall we?" Princeps said. "If you don't let me go with you, I'll tell everyone you all are leaving," she said, getting cockier. I groaned in annoyance. "Just let her go," I said to Princeps. "If she gets hurt, it was her call." He agreed. We made our way to the building across the main garden area to meet up with the rest of the group when we heard a loud crashing sound, followed by a screech of pain. "The bird room," Princeps said, rushing to the door. He pushed open the glass door to see the door to the bird room shattered once more. A few of the captive ostriches fled into the jungle. One ostrich lay motionless in the doorway. In the darkness of the building, I noticed the unmistakable silhouette of the Deinonychus. "What is it?" Elizabeth said excitedly. "Luke was right," Princeps whispered. "It's a fucking dinosaur." The dromaeosaur had tilted its head up and barked. "Is that a velociraptor?" Elizabeth asked. "Somehow worse than that," I replied. "That's the second time ostriches have escaped into the wild," the professor grumbled. I slowly turned to face him, stunned. "Second," I whispered loudly. "Also, why worry about that when we're dealing with—" The Deinonychus turned to look at us. It fled quickly, like a fox fleeing a henhouse. The feathered tail disappeared into the brush. "Tomorrow we look for the stream. Get some rest," Princess said finally. I walked to the dorms. Elizabeth followed close behind, grinning with her hands behind her back. "Are you excited?" she said enthusiastically, walking with a childlike strut. "Honestly, yeah, I am," I told her. She reminded me of a child. She perceived the world as a grand adventure. A part of me wanted to be annoyed at her energetic demeanor, but a part of me enjoyed having a naive companion. She was charming to be around, as cruel as that makes me seem. We entered the dorms and got ready to sleep. After I brushed my teeth and changed into a large t-shirt and old shorts, I crawled into my bed and pulled the covers over my body. "Where have you been?" Matthew said suddenly, looking down at me from the top bunk. "None of your business," I said firmly. "We're actually going to look for—" Elizabeth began but stopped when I shushed her silently. "That sounds fun. Can I join?" he asked. "You don't even know what we're doing," I told him. "Yeah, I do. You're going to look for the fruits," he said confidently. Damn it. I didn't even bother arguing with them. Hell, forget we even had this conversation by morning. "Can you all do me a favor and shut the hell up?" Isaac's disembodied voice said from across the room. I looked around for which bed he was in. "Sorry," I said quietly. I turned on my phone and opened Instagram. With no connection, I simply stared at a loading screen. A loon called from somewhere in the jungle. Loons didn't live in coastal environments, right? I guess I really needed to sleep. So that's exactly what I did. The next morning was when everything went downhill. What happened on that day could not be described with logic alone. It would be like explaining how an ant grew wings and quadrupled in size, but even that wouldn't compare. That's just stupid. We told the rest of the campers and staff we were leaving under the pretense of catching the escaped ostriches. The professor didn't tell them he was bringing a shotgun. We left at 7:28 in the morning. The weather was humid and densely foggy. I tied my shoes and left with the others. We left the premises of the camp. I tried my best to retrace my steps. We descended down a nature trail, passing ant hills and monkey troops. I made sure not to trip on any roots, but Elizabeth casually walked without a care. Professor Princess, shotgun in hand, followed closely. In any other circumstance, a shotgun would be overkill. However, a shotgun wasn't enough. We turned around a bend and were met with an absolutely putrid sight. It took several minutes to even comprehend what the hell it was. It was the corpse of a howler monkey crushed against a tree. The tree was torn to shreds. It looked like the corpse had melted into the tree's wounds. Flies surrounded the carcass, but it didn't look like a predator had eaten from the corpse. The most bizarre thing about this encounter was the lack of blood. Sure, the corpse was covered in it, but there was no blood pooling down below. Something must have killed it, then chucked the corpse away. Damn, the professor said in an impressed tone. I held my breath as we walked past the corpse. Despite all we'd seen so far, nothing could prepare us for what came next. We entered a clearing next to the stream. Then we saw the tree. The mango tree towered along the canopy. The mangoes were still the same size, but in such a large quantity that the floor around the tree was one giant puddle of skin and purple fluid. There were exposed body parts of animals submerged in the ooze. A baby monkey was halfway submerged, surrounded by sticks and mud. I shuddered at the thought of a parent trying its best to free their child from the substance. In the misty area, it was hard to determine the size of the tree. The fruits seemed to glow like lanterns. Suddenly, the purple substance began to retreat into a hole by the tree. Corpses sank into the ooze and into a pit. I felt a tugging at my ankle. Before I could comprehend what was going on, Professor Prince grabbed my arms and pulled me back out of the ooze. The tree is eating? Princeps asked himself. This is impossible. We should stop trying to reason with ourselves. All logic has long since gone out the window, Elizabeth said, her formal statement slightly startling me. Like a drain, the purple substance retreated into the depression in the ground. We expected to just see a hole in the earth. What we really saw was 1,000 times worse. It appeared to be some sort of digestive organ made of organic tissue. It inhaled and exhaled through a crude sphincter. A putrid scent of rotten carcasses emitted from the opening, causing flies to enter. What? I said at a loss for words. Crunch. All three of us turned around. In the fog stood a bird-like creature as tall as a 2-story house. He remained completely motionless, but appeared to be watching eagerly. The animal was completely engulfed in fog, making it impossible to determine where its eyes were. The worst part was the claws. Almost a meter long, the claws hung down from the bipedal animal's hands, occasionally clicking together or twitching. Frozen with fear, the three of us watched as it turned its head, sizing us up. I knew this animal. Therizinosaurus, I said, my breath barely a whisper. Carnivores usually hunt and ambush their prey. Herbivores, however, are much worse to encounter. They don't kill for food. They simply kill to protect themselves. We were in its territory. The animal tapped its claws together quietly as it watched us. I couldn't even see its chest rising or falling. It simply stayed motionless. The wind waved its feathers. A mango slammed into the ground beside it. The Therizinosaurus continued to stare. It felt like a lifetime had passed during our standoff. Could Prince shoot it? Even if he managed to land a hit on it, the animal would likely retaliate violently, even if it was on the brink of death. Princeps turned to me. What do we do? He whispered. Claws. Weak. Make them break. I forced myself to say through labored breathing. Our communication conjured the Therizinosaurus' interest. It took a step forward, emitting a guttural chattering. The tail feathers swayed hypnotically as it approached like a leopard gecko approaching a cricket. It raked its claws in the dead plants. I tapped my partner's shoulders and gestured towards a rock to my left. We made a break for the boulder. The Therizinosaurus became enraged and began its pursuit. The massive claws swept past us. I grabbed my comrades and dove into the grass. The keratinous claws made contact with the rock. I opened my eyes, expecting to see shattered keratin. The Therizinosaurus claws were for display only, so using them as weapons would be impractical. Or so I thought. I turned behind me to see that the rock was the one damaged. Elizabeth and the professor caught on to my terrified expression and darted away quickly. I ran behind a tree. It never growled or snarled. The only thing I heard was its deep breaths as it pursued. The Therizinosaurus cleaved the tree in half. The claws dismantled the falling tree, causing the bark to rain down on me. It swung once more, its malevolent claws raking into my left shoulder. I sucked air through my teeth in pain. The claws reached down the back of my shirt, holding me in place. I pulled my arms into my shirt and slid out of it. The dinosaur examined the tie-dye shirt with curiosity. It guided the shirt into its beaked mouth and chewed slowly before letting it fall out. I collapsed into the dirt, the many roots and rocks scraping my skin. The massive dinosaur plunged its claws into the soil, pinning me between two of them. I grabbed onto the claws and smashed a rock into the soft flesh above the claw. Enraged, the Therizinosaurus cried out in pain and dropped its other claw down, trying to pierce my neck. I pulled myself up and used my momentum to slide past the attack. "Shoot it!" I screamed. Directing my weight to my back leg, I pushed my body to the side to evade the next swipe. The Therizinosaurus snapped at me, its beak snapping shut inches away from my ear. Blood ran down my body as I sprinted away into the deep jungle. It did not pursue. I heard the sound of gunshots as I tumbled down a hill and fell into a muddy river. This river was much larger than the stream we found previously, but it still possessed the eerie glow of the stream. My eyes widened with the newfound realization. My blood drained into the water. I felt my left arm go limp. I noticed a swarm of aquatic insects swimming around me. They had the appearance of dragonfly larvae, but much larger, probably about the size of a bar of soap. I tried my best to drag myself out onto the riverbank. I grabbed hold of a massive skeleton and pulled myself out of the water. I turned back and stared directly into the cold eyes of a massive crocodile. The Dinosaurus stared at me as I stumbled away from the water. It sank into the depths, its massive tail stirring the water as it descended. I felt hazy and realized I must hit my head when I fell. I felt like my neck was about to break from the weight of my cranium. I instinctively ducked as I heard the loud buzzing of a massive dragonfly swooping over my head. It sounded like a small helicopter. The insect hovered inches away from my face. I didn't want to swat it because the thought of me touching an insect that large made me gag. The Meganeura zipped away and chased after a lizard perched on a branch. The Inel jumped too late, as the large sharp legs snatched at midair. Shit. I made a huge mistake coming here. I stumbled through the forest, the trees waving like grass in the wind as I navigated through the mirage. I felt humbled by nature, my apathetic and intelligent visage crumbling to reveal a pathetic and weak shadow of my former glory. I had wasted my life, never slowing down to realize how irritating I must have appeared to others. After an hour, I realized I was lost. I rested my hand on my shoulder wound and felt the new sensation of a smooth cluster of slimy round objects, which I soon deduced to be maggots burrowed in my flesh. I scratched the wound, causing the dozens of tiny insects to dig deeper in my flesh. I held in my scream and kept moving. Fatigued, I dragged my feet through the jungle. I processed the thought of laying down and sleeping. I wanted nothing more than to stop moving and let the jungle digest me. I was going to die. They say that nobody dies without regrets. I would probably agree with the majority. I never did anything outright terrible in my life. At its worst, it was just unfulfilling. I never accomplished anything great or saved a life. I just passed my classes and did the bare minimum. Was I really happy with that? Absolutely not. It was my fate to meet these anomalies. Whether I died to them or made them a turning point in my life was my choice alone. That's why I'll keep trudging through the jungle. My legs felt like the stumps of dead trees. I felt like I was going to buckle under my own weight. I didn't bother asking how I hadn't lost consciousness from blood loss. Each step felt like a minute passing. Suddenly I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw two camp employees. Their eyes widened in shock. "Holy shit, kid, are you alright?" one of them asked. The other gave the first employee a look that said, "Are you seriously asking that?" I looked down at my hands. My fingernails were caked with blood and my arms covered in dust. I looked like I just crawled out of hell. They told me that I fell to the ground face first. I woke up in the medical facility. A large bandage was wrapped around my left shoulder and upper body. I gazed at the heart rate monitor as it beeped quietly. Despite feeling exhausted, I felt no need to sleep. I wanted to talk to someone immediately. Outside my room, someone looked through the window. It was the professor. A wave of emotions flooded over me. I was relieved of his survival, angered at his abandonment, and concerned at why he was watching me. I stared him in the eye. He knocked on the heavy wooden door. I motioned him to enter. He limped into the room, diverting his weight to a cane. "Long time no see," I said to him. "Take off your bandage," he said bluntly. "What? My bandage?" I stuttered. "Want I need that?" "Just take it off," he ordered sternly. I had no intention of arguing with him. I unwrapped the bloody bandage. He held a mirror behind my back. I was right. I looked into the handheld mirror. My blood ran cold. There was no scar. There was no bruise. My wound had completely healed. "How long was I out?" I panicked. "A day," he said. My body had regenerated in a day. "Don't bother asking how," Princess said as the question began to escape my mouth. "Does the camp know?" I asked frantically, referring to the animal we encountered. "Where's Elizabeth?" "They don't know, and Elizabeth is playing checkers with the other campers," he answered. "That isn't a good idea. That thing," I said with disgust, "shouldn't be kept hidden. People could get hurt," I proclaimed. "They'll get hurt whether we tell them or not," he said. I looked at him. "You realize what you're saying, right?" Princeps nodded. "If word gets out, this island could be at risk. Imagine all the scientific advancements we could make here," he said. "Imagine all of the scientists who'll die here," I said coldly. I suddenly realized something. Elizabeth is going to tell everyone what happened. She can't keep her mouth shut. Princeps nodded. "I am aware. Everyone on the campus is going to know, just not anyone off this island." I couldn't tell what he was thinking. Was it selfishness? Was it pride? Why would Prince keep those things a secret? Does he want all these discoveries for himself? I learned a long time ago that trying to reason with anything on this island was a waste of time. "We will be evacuating the island when enough planes get here. I suggest you keep everyone informed about what we're dealing with here," he said. I nodded and left the room. As I left the medical facility and went outside into the sunny main thoroughfare, people stared at me like they were seeing a ghost. Elizabeth got up from her checkers game and ran up to me. "How'd you sleep?" she said. She looked down at my body. Where's your shirt?" she asked. "Good question," I said without elaboration. "Whoa," she continued. "What's your workout routine?" Here I was mistaking you for a geek. "What's your max bench?" "You ask too many questions," I said, hiding my smile. As much as I hate to admit it, I did enjoy the attention, as I don't get much of it at home. "How did you get away from that dinosaur unscathed?" she asked me. "I was going to ask you the same thing," I said. Suddenly, Matthew approached me. "Is it true you fought a T-Rex? Who won?" he asked. "You've got to be kidding me. That wasn't a T-Rex and I wouldn't call it a fight." I shrugged him off. "What was it then?" he pressured me. "You could say it was a giant turkey," I said jokingly. I entered the dorms. I pulled out a clean shirt from my suitcase and pulled it over my body. I examined my arms as they slide out of the short sleeves. Not a single scratch. It must be from soaking in that river. Even then, wouldn't I get an infection from the water? I want to know why this is happening. If this strange liquid causes animals to reverse engineer their offspring, would my child be more primitive? I grew more uneasy as I paced around the room. Nothing about this is right. I struggled to cling to any form of reason. Despite everything, I still wanted to go back out there to the mango tree. I want to see the organic hole next to it as it absorbs the mummified animals. I want to see more dinosaurs. The mere thought concerned me. My basic survival instincts were being thrown aside because of my passion for science. Maybe me and the professor were two sides of the same coin. I don't want to keep guessing. I want to know. I was ignorant back then. Looking at it now, I was reckless and stupid. I didn't fear the consequences. Maybe I was cocky and expected to regenerate my wounds again. I don't understand myself. The camp was on lockdown for the remainder of the trip. Nobody left the premises. Nobody was allowed out. However, nobody accounted for the fact that people were still allowed in. Most of the college students from various schools had gathered in the cafeteria. Most of them were on their phones or talking with friends. "You made a quick recovery," Zeke said, taking a seat across the table. "I must say, I am thoroughly impressed." "You're giving me too much credit," I smiled. "I only did the running part." Zeke tapped his chin. He said. "Tell me, what did you encounter that could manage to almost slice off your arm?" I rested my cheek on my arm. "You're not gonna believe me, but..." He raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure it wasn't one of the ostriches that escaped?" he asked. "Well, yes, but actually no." I elaborated. "Do you remember the vulture hatching on the first day of camp?" I asked. "Yes, I do remember that. The hatchling was an interesting anomaly, he said. To be frank, I think it was a Deinonychus that hatched from that egg, I told him. He stifled a laugh. You're serious? You know that doesn't just happen, right? He said, doubting me. Something told me that he wasn't completely convinced that I was wrong. I explained my theory. Tectonic plates shift in the earth, causing earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. What if the shifting of a plate caused a virus to go into a cave stream? What if this virus caused reverse evolution, turning birds back into dinosaurs? What if there was DNA mixed with the virus that turned them into a specific animal? Zeke was at a loss for words. You're an interesting man, Lucas. You think I'm crazy, don't you? I asked, embarrassed. No, not at all. You might be onto something, to say the least, he said, taking a bite out of a saltine cracker he snatched from the salad bar. If you are completely correct on your hypothesis, I take you for a genius, he said, wiping the dust off his fingers. Matthew sat down beside me. Hey Zeke, are you an emotional advisor for Luke too? He asked. I turned to Zeke, who gave me an awkward look. Not exactly, he said. Matthew scratched his head. That's odd. Anyway, what are you talking about? Zeke cleared his throat. We're betting on a score for tonight's volleyball game. I think the girls are going to beat the boys 40-35. Can you even get that score in volleyball? I had no clue and didn't bother asking. Something told me Zeke knew about as much as I did. I think I should join the team, Matthew said. When I get in a flow state, a feel half as heavy as normal, I glide on the dance floor. I wanted to smash the palm of my hand against my temple until I stopped hearing. Half as heavy, huh? Zeke said. That sounds intriguing. He continued flaunting his volleyball skills. The only thing impressive about his skills was that I didn't know he played volleyball. You took me for an esports kind of guy, I said. Suddenly all three of us turned to see a figure past the glass window. The glass doors of the entrance shattered. The entire room went completely silent as everyone directed their gaze at the shattered door. A Deinonychus stood tall at the entrance. It was not alone. Nobody screamed at first. Strangely, they seemed a bit smaller than the one I saw when I first found the mango tree. They must be adolescents. We turned to the other exit, the one that led to the main interior. A Deinonychus had positioned itself in front of that door. At least 5 more had come through the glass door when we looked back. At that moment, I realized what was happening. This wasn't a hunt. These were experimental teenagers willing to commit mass slaughter. Deinonychus, despite common perception, was not a pack animal. They were occasionally found in groups during fossil digs, but it was likely due to a mass feeding frenzy. They likely died fending off each other around a kill. Seeing Deinonychus work together to slaughter us was not only terrifying, but also concerning. Were scientists wrong about how they acted, or did Deinonychus change its behavior to adapt on the island? Screams echoed through the cafeteria. The pack near the main entrance advanced, jumping into the mob and clawing at anyone they could find. The raptors at the door snapped at anyone trying to push their way through. I dove under a table and noticed many others had done the same. I watched in terror as bodies piled on the floor. Blood began to pool throughout the cafeteria. A man crawled under the table to try and reach me, but a raptor had plunged its claw into his spine, paralyzing him. It stomped down on his neck, ripping his trachea. In the chaos, I had lost sight of Matthew and Zeke. The Deinonychus discovered through trial and error their strategy of killing humans. Their strategy consisted of jumping on someone's back, biting onto their neck, and plunging their sickle claws into the spine, causing paralysis. Calling it a massacre wouldn't be doing it justice. Mass murder caused by animals was almost unheard of in modern times. The worst part about the incident is that the raptors probably planned their hunt, learning the location of the escape routes. The screaming eventually died down as more and more bodies piled. Eventually, a group mustered the courage to push past the Deinonychus guarding the door. Alarmed, it retreated back to its comrades. The raptors reevaluated their plan. They didn't expect people to actually push through. All 7 raptors charged at the fleeing crowd. I remained under the table, left almost completely alone in the silent cafeteria. A man next to me pushed himself out from under the table. As his head disappeared above the table, I heard a snapping sound. His body collapsed limply onto the stool connected to the cafeteria table. I held my breath, my heart racing. I heard the clicking of claws as the dinosaur walked across the table above me. It sniffed a few times and leapt down. It crouched and made eye contact with me. Over here. It said to me, its fiery orange eyes studying me with newfound curiosity. I clenched my fists in anger. It noticed my expression change and flared its eyebrow feathers. The room was empty besides me and the animal. If I killed it, its comrades wouldn't notice. However, if it gained the upper hand, I wouldn't have backup. I didn't like my odds. No matter how strong I was, even if I killed it, I wouldn't be able to leave the confrontation without a fatal injury. The Deinonychus directed its gaze behind me and puffed up its feathers in an attempt at intimidation. I turned around to see the scaly legs of a new animal. It was at least 6 feet tall and bipedal. It crouched down, giving me a good view of the animal. It had a bright orange crest. No, 2 bright orange crests. It had quills surrounding its neck and upper torso. Its arms were tucked under its stomach. The creature stood tall, its head lightly banging into a ceiling fan. The Deinonychus snarled and ran off. The Dilophosaurus watched as the Deinonychus fled. It turned to the dozens of fresh carcasses and tore into flesh with its oddly shaped mouth. I crawled out from under the table and crept away. I stumbled over the corpses. I realized that I could be stepping over Matthew or Elizabeth. The thought made me shudder. I didn't know why it took me this long to care. People were dying and I stayed silent. I timed my movements with the Dilophosaurus eating patterns. I eventually made it through the door into the main facility. I stood up and began walking. I don't know where I was going or why. I just needed to find someone alive. I heard a loud gunshot go off somewhere up ahead. What followed was an ear-piercing screech of agony and desperation. The wounded Deinonychus fled and slammed into a wall. We both made eye contact at the same time. It sprinted towards me and collapsed, succumbing to shotgun wounds. Its lifeless orange eyes glassed over as it looked up at me. It coughed blood onto my foot as it died. Professor Princeps hurried around the corner, panting and covered in blood. His expression softened as he saw me. "Lucas," he smiled, "you're alive." Professor Princeps was an interesting man. I couldn't tell whether I hated the man or admired him. He had the ability to motivate anyone to do anything he found fun. Sure, he was self-centered, but his unshakable will to keep moving forward was inspiring. I smiled, a wave of relief washing over me. I pointed at his shotgun. "Do you have any extras of those?" "I have the next best thing," he said, pulling a handheld pistol out of his bag. I expected some form of argument opposing my possession of a firearm. Either he didn't care or was too desperate to worry about safety. "Just, don't point it at anybody or yourself," he said hastily, reloading the double barrel. This wasn't an act of heroism anymore. Too many have died to call it one. We were simply defending anyone who still managed to live. "Many fled into the jungle," Prince Set said as he rushed through the hallway, "but I'm sure there are still some here." I nodded when he looked back at me for a look of understanding. "Should we capture one alive for research purposes?" I asked. "I'm going to kill every last overgrown buzzard on this campus," he said unexpectedly. "I should probably tell you this," I began. "There is a new animal in the cafeteria eating the corpses." "You'll kill that one too," Prince Sets, discouraging further elaboration on my end. I thought back to the cafeteria where I was almost murdered. The Dilophosaurus had no idea I was there, but scared off the Deinonychus so it could eat. I felt like I owed it, although it is just an animal. "Let's focus on the others first," I said, trying to sway him away from the idea of killing it. "I apologize. I just don't feel like myself right now," he said. "None of us do," I responded. Smoke billowed out into the halls. There must be a fire nearby, Prince Mos noticed. We rushed to the source of the smoke. The wooden ceiling had been engulfed in a raging flame. The Deinonychus ran into view with a charred stick in its mouth, the end bleeding smoke. It looked me dead in the eye and dropped the stick on the ground before fleeing. I ran over and stomped on the stick before the fire could spread. "They're forcing us out of the buildings," Princeps said, his voice shaky. "They're actively trying to kill us. They're doing it for sport. Think of it like teenagers going on dangerous joyrides on the highway," I explained. "God damn it," the professor said, clutching his shotgun. His hands shook as he clenched his fists. Zeke and Dr. Harding should be near the dorms evacuating people. An idea came to my mind. The Deinonychuses could be waiting outside for people to escape, so we have time to find survivors inside before this place is razed. Princeps looked at me morosely. "Then that is our plan." We continued searching through the burning facility. We passed the animal room and opened all the cages. We were already there, so not freeing them would be plain scummy. "You guys are here to save me, right?" Elizabeth said out of nowhere. "Where have you been?" I asked, panicked and confused. "Here with the animals." She responded like I was supposed to know that. "But not that one," she said, pointing to the Deinonychus perched on the broken windowsill. It craned its head and looked at us. It stretched its wings and scratched the back of its neck with its claws. Princeps grabbed his gun. The Deinonychus turned to face the cage where we contained the baby vulture. Then it turned back to me. Its pupils dilated and made eye contact with me. I lightly pushed down on the end of the professor's shotgun. On the day the vulture chick hatched, it imprinted on me. "That is the same vulture chick," I said. Princeps looked at me with an expression I could only describe as concern. "Are you sure?" The Deinonychus stared at me, its piercing eyes illuminated by the flames. It jumped back outside. I turned to the other two. "We need to get to the tree," I announced. "Why should we go back there?" Princeps asked. "You nearly died last time." "I am aware. The tree is the embodiment of this virus. This is just a hunch, but I think if we destroy the tree, it will stunt the transmission of the virus. Most of the virus is being transported into the tree, causing animals to eat the fruit laced with the mutation. Destroying the tree would stop the virus from spreading via fruit." "Even if all of that is true," Princeps said, "why destroy it? What would we gain?" "We gain nothing," I replied. "However, the animals can no longer eat the forbidden fruit, stopping any more anomalies from appearing." Although I sounded knowledgeable, I was grasping at straws. I didn't even know why I wanted to go back to the tree anyway. We hastily escaped the burning building. Rushing through the thick jungle, we heard the distant call of an unknown animal. I expected to see a Baryonyx, Carnotaurus, or Carcharodontosaurus anytime I ran past a tree. The thought terrified me, but there was a small part of me that wanted to see them. At least I think so. After safely traveling through the jungle, we finally made it to the tree. The ground was completely clear of any liquid waste. The organic pit of flesh emitted a foul odor as it contracted like a breathing lung. "It smells of methane," I say, pulling out a box of matches I stole from the lab. Elizabeth turned to me. "You're doing this? Right now?" I didn't want to seem like a hotshot action hero. I just wanted to minimize the outbreak of this new substance. Suddenly, the Therizinosaurus crept out from the trees. An entire arm was missing from it, the wound still bleeding. It must run from something larger. As soon as it locked onto us, it wasted no time chasing. I tried to evade, but the claws swiped the matchbox out of my hand. The Therizinosaurus stomped them into the ground. "Get the hell out of here. I can handle this," Princeps said, shotgun in hand. "You can kill it with a shotgun. Are you insane?" I screamed. "Just get back and I'll prove I can," he yelled, his voice becoming desperate. "I'm not going to ask you again." He scowled and aimed his shotgun at the towering beast. It cocked its head curiously. The Therizinosaurus slashed the professor's back. He collapsed to the ground. Blood dripped from his mouth as he looked up at me. "I'm sorry. I knew all along," he coughed. "Please forgive me, Lucas." I looked back at Professor Princeps one last time. Bleeding badly, he lodged the shotgun into the organic hole. The Therizinosaurus swiped at him, but it was too late. The professor pulled the trigger. The heated sparks of the gun made contact with the trapped methane. The underground buildup caused a massive explosion. The Therizinosaurus was engulfed in hungry flames that wrapped around its body. The tree started to burn as the ground below it collapsed into fire. Blood and tissue from the unknown life form were flung into the sky from the blast. Chunks of flesh and blood rained down on us. The mango tree started to snap as the sunken ground gave way. Hundreds of melon-sized mangoes plummeted from their branches and into the flame. The tree bled the purple liquid from every pore. The scorching Therizinosaurus screamed in agony as it desperately tried to claw its way out of the collapsing pit. I could have sworn I heard a scream from somewhere in the fire, one that wasn't human. Elizabeth lost her footing and began to sink into the ground. Without thinking, I grabbed her hand and pulled her back before the ground below her collapsed. She smiled and laughed. "Thanks." "Yeah," I said, still rattled by the explosion. The ringing in my ears didn't seem like it was going to stop soon. I respected how unshakable her character seemed. "You impress me," I told her. She chuckled, confused. "What do you mean?" "It's nothing," I said awkwardly. My experience talking to others rearing its ugly head. Covered in blood and tissue, Elizabeth and I headed back to the camp. Along the way, we were greeted with the gruesome sight of Matthew's upper body. His flesh wasn't sliced or crushed, it was ripped and pulled apart. His face was contorted into a silent scream. The color had been drained from his body. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Elizabeth remained silent. I tried not to look below his torso. Although I wanted to give him a proper burial, I knew that whatever attacked the Therizinosaurus and killed Matthew was still at large. I could feel the ground vibrating with a slight hum. Something was out there. The vibrations were similar to the communication sounds of an elephant, which means whatever is out there is not alone. Navigating through the dense forest reminded me of a game of chess. I made sure my moves were as precise as possible. Whenever I heard a branch snap, I knew something was nearby. Whatever was hunting us knew where we were. However, they could not reveal themselves too early for an unknown reason. As our opponent made their move, we crossed a shallow stream. I guided Elizabeth to a different bank to distort our footsteps and scent. A heavy footstep signaled us to get moving. The smoke rose through the trees from the camp. Suddenly, a massive ship horn blared through the jungle, startling birds. Without hesitation, we made our way towards it. A tree frog watched me from a branch. I noticed a few homocephalids watching from under a large leaf, their beady eyes glistening in the sunlight. They chirped and clicked their beaks nervously as I walked past. Looking back, I realized that we could have very well been dealing with a large pair of carnivores. They were not eager to pursue us, as the horn probably scared them. We weren't worthy prey anyway. Even still, the thought of us being silently stalked by an intelligent being made my blood run cold. Although every dinosaur I've seen is a theropod, not all of them were carnivores. As less and less birds showed up every day, I guess more species of dinosaurs emerged. To this day, I have no clue how long this event was happening. If there is a God out there, I want to know why this happened. I have to. We kept our pace steady as we trekked through the jungle. The usually bubbly Elizabeth was unnervingly silent. If I wanted to say something, the thought of me speaking would just get snuffed out. As I walked, I stepped on a hard object. I looked down, expecting a rock. It was a tooth the size of a banana. It was slightly yellowed and worn. "If we're planning on eating, I'm allergic to those," Elizabeth said, pointing to the tooth. "You're allergic to teeth? Hold up. Why would we eat teeth?" I replied. "That isn't a banana." "Yeah? Why would it be?" She shrugged. "I don't know," she said, looking down at her feet. She scratched her once colorful sweater, now caked in ash and soot. I examined the tooth. It could be Alioramus, Vistaheversur, or maybe even Tarbosaurus. It was definitely some type of tyrannosauroid. The problem was the size. Could it actually be the Tyrannosaurus? "Do you think we killed their spawning ground?" Elizabeth asked, ripping me away from my inner nerd theories. I calmly answered the previously ludicrous question. "I doubt it," I said, not telling her about the homocephalids. There was no chance any of them came from that pit. That wasn't some sort of queen from a sci-fi movie. It was just another unknown animal mutated by the substance. It was like a flower waiting for bees to pollinate and spread its seeds. We made our way out into a clearing. A large ferry boat had docked on the island. I noticed a few familiar faces as we got closer. Isaac pointed at us and waved as he leaned off the bow of the ship. We made it to the dock and boarded the boat. We were greeted with towels, bandages, and food. Starving. I scarfed down a loaf of sourdough bread. Elizabeth held up a mango, studied it, and put it back into the basket nervously. We were guided to a windowed room with more survivors. I looked down and saw Zeke sitting against the wall, arms wrapped around his bent knees, cradling himself. His eyes were bloodshot and staring blankly into the distance. He clutched onto the towel wrapped around him. Zeke looked up and noticed my presence. As I sat down, the weight of my emotions finally caved in on me. I didn't wail and sob, I just stared out into the void as tears streamed down my cheeks. I screamed internally, trying my best to maintain my poise. My eyes stung. My throat felt like I had swallowed something sharp that I couldn't cough out. After a few days of waiting, the boat set sail back to the mainland. I stared through the foggy porthole at the island, as it shrank from view. Suddenly, something caught my eye. A smaller boat was heading to the island. It was a research boat. It's been a few months since the incident. I've gone to therapy, both physical and emotional therapy, and I think I'm getting better. My therapist told me to get this story out to the world as soon as I felt comfortable. I'm glad you all could hear my testimony, whether you believe me or not. I doubt anyone believes me, even my therapist, but if even one of you out there believes in my story, I'll be overjoyed. I think Costa Rica is closed down to the public now. I applied for a job overseas. They pay very well, but they don't give me too many details on the actual job. I just know it's on an island somewhere. I got lucky, as this job doesn't take everyone. I'm thrilled to do research for my job somehow. Anyway, I'll update this page in a few months when I go home for the holidays. I don't think the gas station I work at is normal. I want to start this off with the simple fact that I don't believe in ghosts. At least I didn't. I'm not sure anymore. Sorry, let me give you a quick background of my situation. Have you ever found yourself making your way into a gas station at the edge of town and turned your gaze towards the sleep-deprived Clark quietly minding his business? Well shit, you may have met me. I work the overnight shift at my local gas station, sitting between abandoned, dilapidated buildings and a stretch of flourishing forests, the road between being the only connector to these two opposites of life. Now I'm sure you're probably asking, that sounds pretty sketchy, why would you work there? I know because I asked myself the same thing, but the pay isn't bad, and being a broke 20-year-old didn't suit me. The owners aren't bad people, just distant. In my 3 months of working here, I've only spoken to them a handful of times. The interview process felt weird too. All I got was a phone call asking if I wanted the job and if I could work the hours. Of course I answered. Yes, who wouldn't? And only a few days later I found myself at the front counter with a list of instructions and to-dos. The interior was nothing special, if I'm being honest. Shelves of overpriced candy and canned goods with a set of coolers lining the side wall. Then there was me, sat up at my desk next to the front door with a squeaky old chair and a cash register that always seems to want to get stuck every 4 transactions. With all that being said, you would assume that I hate my job, but I don't. It's extremely quiet. I only get a handful of customers a night, and they usually keep to themselves. I grew to think of the insulation as a small perk of the job. But something happened last night that I just need someone else to hear. 1:48 a.m. Leaning back in my chair, I sat making my way through the latest book in my backlog when I heard the familiar ding coming from the front door. Placing my book down, I stood up to face the man who had entered the store. The best way I could describe him was the stereotypical trucker. Boots, blue jeans, Carhartt jacket, and a big beard, yet he was clean without a single speck of dirt on him. "Evening, sir, what can I do for you?" Giving him my best and tired, "Just tell me what you want and leave greeting," I could muster. "Oh, nothing much. Just give me 20 on the diesel for pump 4. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a $20 bill, handing it to me. As I entered in the information on my keypad, he spoke again. "I'd recommend you stay safe out here. I've heard stories of weird things happening around here. Wouldn't want anything bad to happen." Raising my eyebrow, I glanced over at him to see if he was threatening me, but no, he just stood there waiting for me to give him the oak. I appreciate the advice, but I've never seen anything out of the ordinary over here. I'd say your sources are feeding you lies. Handing him his receipt, he chuckled as he made his way out of the store, and within a couple minutes he was gone. 2:08 a.m. Another ding resounded in my ears, placing my book back down. I stood up and identified the new customer. That's when things started taking a weird turn. The same man from a half hour ago stood in front of me. Same boots, same jeans, same jacket, same everything. However, this time his jeans were lined with small patches of dirt. As confused as I was, I decided to leave it alone and just do my job. "Evening, sir, what can I do for you?" Standing in front of my counter, I could feel his eyes digging burrows through me. Luckily, I didn't have to wait long for my answer. "Oh, nothing much. Just give me 20 on the diesel for pump 4. Handing me a $20 bill as he finished. Wanting him out as soon as possible, I quickly entered everything in on my register and handed him his receipt. "I'd recommend you stay safe out here. I've heard stories of weird things happening around here. Wouldn't want anything bad to happen." Having my fair share of this guy's ominous bullshit, I decided to not encourage this conversation. "Yeah, man, I hear you." With that, he made his way out, and I tried to return to my book, getting my mind off of this weird customer. 2:38 a.m. Once again, the ring of the front door pulled my attention, and almost as if on cue, he was back, but something was off this time. It looked as if he just crawled out of a grave with dirt and residue coating his whole body, and if that wasn't enough, he had thick cuts across his arms and face. However, no blood leaked out of the gashes. Deciding I'd had enough of this charade, I shouted at the man. In hindsight, that probably wasn't the best idea, but can you blame me? "All right, man, what the hell happened to you? This is your 3rd time here, and it looks like you took a quick detour into the local swamp." Pointing at him in fury or fear, I wasn't quite sure. I looked him dead in the eyes. But that was easily my worst mistake. His eyes were milky, as if someone drowned out the color in them. Retracting my hand, I couldn't help the gulp retreating down my throat. Hell, I wish I could too. As he opened his mouth, his jaw produced a wretched cracking before producing noise. "Oh, nothing much. Just give me 20 on the diesel for pump 4. As if robotic, he reached out and handed me another bill. I could see more cuts and bruises on his fingers. Gingerly, I reached out and snatched the bill from his hand and began to enter it into my register. My heart sank, and I felt a frigid chill crawl up my spine as I noticed the small pop-up on the screen. Pump new balance, $40. I began to sweat as my brain turned in my head, panicking. I jerked my head towards the window facing the lot. To my horror, no truck sat anywhere outside. As I started contemplating on whether I was going insane or just tired, I felt heat building on my wrist. Spinning my head back to the man, I saw him tightly gripping my wrist. However, I couldn't feel the pressure of his grip. The only thing I could feel was a burning sensation that kept growing as he held my wrist. "Off! Let go of my arm. What the hell do you think you—" My voice lost all power as I met the horror in front of me. The man now held his face only a few inches from mine. As we made eye contact, his face twisted into a horrifying smile, producing cracked teeth. "I'd recommend you stay safe out here. I've heard stories of weird things happening around here. Wouldn't want you to join the rest." At this point, I was frozen in fear. My voice left me to fend for myself, as all I could do was stare at this man standing in front of me. It felt as though we stood there for minutes before I finally built up the courage to say something. "Yeah, you don't say." Giving him my own wary smile, I was finally able to yank my wrist from his grasp, only to be met with charcoal ring with a small crimson symbol sitting in the middle where his hand previously held. Before I could even look back up, he had already turned on his feet, making his way out the store, moving out of my line of sight. Without a moment to think, I collapsed on the chair. My breathing felt haggard, as I tried to steady myself from what the hell I just experienced. After a moment, I checked my phone for the time. It read 2:40. 2 minutes? I screamed in my head. How the hell could it have just been 2 minutes? Lowering my head, I just decided to surrender myself to this weirdness and tried to brush it back into my mind to finish my shift, but I wasn't so lucky. 3:08 a.m. I was in the back room looking for some stock to put out as the ding rang out from the front. Flinching, I couldn't help but think back to that man. Was he back? Sighing as I accepted my fate, I walked out to the front. What awaited me, however, wasn't what I expected. I'm still not sure what it was either. It looked like a tall man around 6'5". He was dressed in a long black trench coat with a hood thrown over his head. I tried to look into his face, but all I was met with was a deep dark abyss. It felt as if I was looking at nothing at all. Whatever it was, it quickly made its way to the register and placed a thin white slip of paper on the counter before leaving as quickly as it had arrived. However weary I was of the contents of this note, I couldn't help the curiosity sprouting in my brain, so I opened it. The note contained only 2 words written in a soft thin cursive. "You passed? Passed? What?" Staring down at the paper, I didn't understand what it meant. Did I pass some type of challenge? Maybe a game? I honestly didn't know. That's when the familiar ring of the door gave me a slight heart attack. "Landon, how's it going, bro?" It was Tyler, my best friend, who I just about wanted to strangle to death for the scare he just gave me. After calming down, I explained what just happened, and I could tell he didn't believe me. "Okay man, how about I stay with you for the rest of your shift so you don't see any more spooky ghosts?" Laughing as he finished, I took him up on the offer, and the night flew by without anything else happening. When the opener finally came in, I quickly gathered my stuff before making my way towards the door. However, he stopped me before I made it out. "Oh yeah, be careful on your way home. Apparently some dude crashed into a ditch last night. You never know what kind of people are on the road." I went pale, slowly turning back towards him, and cleared my throat. You wouldn't know what kind of car the guy was driving, would you?" Seconds passed like minutes, as I could see him thinking. "Yeah? I think they were saying a big pickup truck or something like that." I could feel sweat fall down my face after hearing that. Nodding, I made my way to my car and rushed home. I've been home ever since, still trying to wrap my head around everything that occurred last night. Even while writing this, the burn mark is still sat on my wrist, reminding me of what happened. As I have been dwelling on everything, the mark reminds me more and more like some type of branding. Nonetheless, I have work again tonight, and after all that, I'm not game to just sit idly by and just wait for whatever's going on at the gas station to come and get me. He's gonna go in a little early tonight and ask the guy who's closing if he's ever seen anything out of the ordinary. I'm hoping he may have some insight for me. If you have any idea of what might be happening, please let me know. It will hopefully come back and be able to give closure to this whole ordeal. However, if I don't assume the worst. There's no way to sugarcoat this. I almost died Sunday night, and at this point, I've given up on believing last week's encounter was just a one-off thing. There's something seriously wrong with this place, and I think I'm officially far too deep to claw my way back out. Okay, I need to calm down and write my thoughts clearly. If you have no idea who I am, I would recommend that you go and read my previous post here. But if you don't want to catch up, just know that I work the night shift at a gas station at the edge of town where weird things are starting to happen. After putting out my last post, I got some much needed sleep, and the rest of my day went smoothly. As I mentioned at the end of my previous post, I ended up leaving an hour early for work. I wasn't sure if I would learn anything new, but it was worth a try. When I got into my car, the radio sprang to life talking about the local killings plaguing the area. People have been found with their entrails sprawled out from their stomachs and their right eye removed. I'll tell you, it's some scary shit. Luckily, it had nothing to do with me. Once I got to work, I met up with the guy who was working. I found out his name is Jacob. If I could choose one word to describe him, it would easily be stoner. Got an idea of what he looks like in your head? Great, because you're dead on. He wore a slightly dirty hoodie with jeans and a beanie pulling his entire outfit together. Other than that, he's a pretty cool guy. None of that matters though. I only had one question I needed to ask him. Yo Jacob, have you ever seen anything weird around the gas station? I asked bluntly. Beating around the bush was never my forte. Raising his eyebrow, he placed his finger on his chin, as I could see him racking his brain for an answer. Nothing I can really think of off the top of my head, although there is that weird dog hanging around the woods. Replying bluntly, I couldn't help but raise my own eyebrow at his response. Weird dog? What weird dog? I asked. You know man, that hairless dog that hangs around right on the edge of the woods. It's pretty weird. It's got all white skin with these bright orange eyes. It's whatever though, probably a stray. A part of me couldn't believe what I was hearing. The other part of me couldn't believe he was sharing this so calmly. My mouth hung slightly agape as the only thing I could muster was a light. Huh? Anyways, I'm gonna get out of here, since you showed up. Have a good night, man. Waving me off, he left the store, left alone with my thoughts in the now empty store. I couldn't help but let my feelings known to the dead air around me. Oh come on, am I being pranked right now? Fortunately for me, the rest of that night went smoothly without any unwanted visitors from the grave. In all honesty, the rest of the week flew by without any new visitors gunning for my head. Although that doesn't mean nothing happened at all. After talking with a few of you, I received the idea of putting a line of salt across the front doorway of the store, as this was a way to ward off entities. Now, if I'm gonna be honest, it sounded like the stupidest idea I've ever heard, but hey, I'd rather test something and look like an idiot instead of dying, so I went ahead and laid a line out on Thursday night. Around 1:30, a customer opened the front door before looking down, noticing the thin line of salt. I could see him out of the corner of my eye stop and think for a moment before turning to me. "Is that salt?" he asked, perplexed. Not looking away from my book, I answered unamused. "Sure is," responding clearly unamused. "Why?" "Ants." "You guys have an ant infestation?" "Nope, but it could happen." The man finally gave up with a shrug before finishing his business inside and leaving. I can't say if it worked or not, however I can at least say nothing happened in the few days I tried the salt line out. Maybe I need to try it again. Oh, there were a couple of you who recommended a book series to me from a guy named Jack, as my experience sounded very similar to some of the stuff you experienced while working at a gas station. I'm only through the first bit of book 1, and good God, that guy is being put through the ringer. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to apply anything that he has described to what I'm going through, but I'll keep reading to see what else I can try and grasp. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. Let me explain what happened last weekend. Let me preface everything with the fact that I felt incredibly paranoid these last couple of days. It feels like someone's been watching my every move day in and day out. The problem is that every other day felt like I was being watched from afar. Then Saturday night it felt as though the person was breathing down my neck. I should have been on high alert all night, however things never seemed to work out in my favor. Sunday marked my 21st birthday. Regularly, this a monumental occasion, but with everything that has been going on, it would have slipped my mind if it weren't for a couple of my friends. Because of that, I ended up at a local hole in the wall a couple hours before work with a couple of my boys, so while they were busy getting shit-faced, I resigned myself to just a single beer. Even so, it was still a great time. Well, that was before the first red flag of night reared its ugly head, which I promptly ignored. It was around 9 when Tyler, with a heavy slur in his speech, turned to me. I just don't get it, Landon. What do you have that I don't? Turning my attention to him, I produced my best, face before responding. Tyler, what the hell are you talking about? You're drunk. Waving him off before returning to my drink. Are you really that oblivious? That girl back there has been staring at you since we got here. As he finished, he gestured behind me with his eyes. Swallowing the pit in my throat spawned on from a mixture of fear and nervousness. I gingerly turned in the direction he gestured to, only to be met with an empty table. Oh haha, very funny. Don't get my hopes up like that. Giving him a light punch in the shoulder before picking my beer back up to finish the last bit. Although as I tilted the glass up, I noticed light bubbling within the liquid. Stupidly, I still finished it off. I don't know, man, that's weird. I just saw her over there. She did walk right up behind you when you were talking about that weird feeling you've been having the last couple of days. Oh well. Shrugging, he continued to drink. Although for me his statement left me feeling incredibly disturbed, still I just shrugged it off as a drunk man rambling and let the night end like that. However, for me, my nightmare had only just begun. Upon leaving my house, I couldn't shake the nagging sensation of being watched from the depths of my brain. Even once I reached the gas station, the sensation never left, having to just grunt and bear it. I quickly made my way into the pitch-black building, unlocking the door and switching on the lights as I entered. Let me quickly explain how our gas station operates. We are open 24/5, closing at 10 p.m. Friday to 9 p.m. Sunday. As you can probably guess, I am in charge of opening the station come Sunday night. Honestly, I never look forward to this shift. I always experience an overlooming sense of dread as I stick the key into the front door, almost as though I am opening Pandora's box. Fortunately for me, there were no mysterious figures waiting for me inside the empty stations, only coolers of drinks, shelves of food, a note on the counter. A note on the counter. Walking to the back of the counter, I tossed my backpack to the floor and picked up the note. In thick crimson text, the note read, "Have you ever felt the gaze of another?" In all honesty, I probably had the dumbest confused look on my face as I read those words over and over in my head. Finally having enough, I crumpled the note up and threw it into the garbage can beside me before I spoke. Okay, if there is someone hiding in here trying to play a prank, I will warn you now that I am armed, and if I find you, I will call the police. I produced a small flip knife from my pocket and flipped the blade out. I'm starting my shift by clearing the store of intruders. Great. Who do I think I am? SWAT. With that, I began clearing each room, which luckily didn't take long as there were only 4 in total. I won't bore you with the details because no one was in there. The bathroom, storage room, and fridge were all clear of intruders. In the end, I brushed off the note as a prank and finished setting the store up for the night. It was around 12:30 a.m. when I heard a light ringing noise coming from one of the coolers. Sighing, I sat my book down on the counter next to my knife and made my way towards the coolers. As I opened the corresponding cooler, the noise suddenly cut as if being connected with the door opening. However, once I closed the door, the ringing was gone altogether. Shrugging, I started to turn around and make my way back to my seat as a voice produced in front of me, giving me a mini heart attack. "Excuse me, I have a question," the woman uttered. "Holy God. Okay, sorry, you scared the hell out of me right there. I never heard you come in," I responded as I jumped back in fright, trying to catch my breath. Now I'm gonna be honest with you, this woman was absolutely stunning. I would guess she was in her mid-20s with sleek jet black hair and piercing crimson eyes. She wore a long black dress and black heels. In all, someone that I shouldn't be seeing at this time of night in this part of town. Honestly, I get surprised when I see anyone on the side of town. I didn't mean to frighten you. I'm sorry. I'm looking for something very specific, and I was hoping you would help me find it. She spoke in a soft, sultry voice. It felt as though she was drawing me in with every word she spoke. Yeah, sure I can. What are you looking for?" Stuttering lightly as I replied. I continued to keep my eyes locked on the strange woman. Responding to my words, she cracked a small smile and spoke. "Well, what I'm looking for isn't the easiest thing to acquire, you see. Although I must say, has anyone told you how beautiful your eyes are?" Slightly confused at the sudden compliment, I felt a tinge of fear crawl up my spine, trying my best to shake it off. I started my reply. "I'm sorry. What are..." As I spoke, my vision started to spiral and a sense of dizziness overcame me. I started stumbling backwards into the cooler, clutching my head. What's going on?" My speech was shaky. As I glanced back at her, I could see her wide-eyed, looking slightly up at me with her hand over her mouth. "Oh no! What's wrong, Landon? You look unwell." Time seemed to freeze as my brain panicked. Consumed by fear. My name. How does she know my name? My eyes dashed from side to side looking for an escape before finally landing back on her. She stood like a mountain in front of me. A large shit-eating grin sat plastered across her face as I could feel her eyes digging burrows into me, as if a predator examining its prey. I slowly inched my hand to my waist, searching for my knife to protect myself. To my horror, I remembered sitting down on the counter when I got up, cursing myself in my head. I started slowly backing away towards the back room. "What's wrong? Don't tell me you're scared of a harmless girl." As she finished, her arm produced a bone-churning crack as a thick black matter spread across her arm, stretching it out and giving her thick, sharp claws as the cherry on top. With that, I didn't care how messed up I was. I wasn't just going to stand here and let her maul me to death. In a split second, I pulled all my strength together and made a break for the back room. I could hear her sprinting right behind me, gaining with every second passed. As terrified as I was, I managed to make it to the door, throwing it open with all my strength before slamming it behind me, and locked it before she started wiggling and pulling on the handle to force it open. "What the hell is wrong with you? What even are you? What even are you?" My voice started to falter as I slowly inched backwards. I could feel my heart beating faster than I ever thought it could. It felt as though it would fly out of my chest if given the chance. On the opposite end, I could feel my mind starting to slip into unconsciousness as I stood in the pitch-black room, and for a few moments things stood that way. My breathing started to slow as I started racking my brain for a solution to get me out of this nightmare. That's when I realized I no longer heard any noises coming from outside the door. Where could she have go? What are you hiding from? Reflexively, I whipped my head towards the source of the noise, but before I even got a chance to react, I felt a hand tightly grip my neck before raising me up and throwing me through the previously locked door. As I flew through the air, I finally landed as my back made contact with the front counter, sending countless items, including myself, crashing to the floor. Face down on the floor, every breath I took felt like stabbing a knife into my spine. As I lay there in agony, my eye caught a glimpse of a shiny object laying directly in front of me. "Yeah, this is my favorite part. Did you know that? Go on and beg for your pathetic life. Maybe I'll listen." Her voice had switched to nothing more than a conniving holler, flipping me over onto my back, no doubt to delight in my suffering. I made eye contact with my soon-to-be killer. Her arms were still as long and animalistic as before, but now her legs and heels looked as though they had molded together, stretching to an inhuman length. The right side of her face was now consumed by the blackness, causing her eye to bulge and teeth to resemble tiny razor blades. The other side of her face was still completely normal, causing a contrast that gave me more chills than if she was just a horrifying amalgamation outright. Grinning from ear to whatever was left of her ear, she awaited my reply. "Eat a dick. I'd rather die with my pride than beg like a bitch." In retrospect, that probably would have sounded a lot cooler if I didn't have to pause between almost every word. Still on the verge of passing out, I knew I didn't have long before my life would be snuffed out. Might as well go out with a bit of dignity. To no one's surprise, however, she did not like this. Reaching down, she gripped my neck and raised me to meet her face to face. "If you want me to do that, I will. You will not be getting out this alive or with any sense of your pride still flourishing. This will be hell for you, but heaven for me, so be happy with that." Reaching her other hand towards my stomach, I could feel her claws brush against her soon-to-be canvas. "Do you why?" barely being able to choke out a single word. "Why what? Why you? Why do I kill? Come on, you need to use your words." Letting up her grip just a smudge to let me answer. "Why did you let down your guard?" A confused expression fell across her face as I mustered up my last bit of strength and plunged the knife I death gripped into her neck. Immediately I fell crashing onto the floor as I could see black sludge start to seep out of her neck. My brain finally gave up on me as I started to drift into unconsciousness. I could feel a light warmth start to swell on my wrist as my vision finally went dark. The last thing I heard was a deep, echoey voice say "Scarlet," with a lighter voice responding, "Oh no." During my state of unconsciousness, I was enveloped with a dream. I sat at the head of a long table, aligned with blacked-out figures filling each chair. They were all engaged in a conversation I could not hear, some nodding while others flailed their arms in annoyance. After what seemed like minutes, all of them turned to face me and in unison said, "Right, Landon. 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 Landon." In an instant, my eyes shot open and I was met with my coworker Jacob shaking me. I was sitting in my chair with a clean store facing directly in front of me. "Come on, man. What are you doing? Be happy I'm opening today. Don't worry. I won't tell the boss you were napping on the job. Haha." I don't think I even have their number, pulling the conversation into a land of nothingness, still reeling back from still being alive. I tried to keep my cool as I slowly stood up, my back shooting with pain as I did. "Yeah, what time is it?" It's 7. I guess you should probably get out here, huh?" Nodding in agreement, I made my unsteady journey to the front door. However, before I could make it, Jacob stopped me. "Hold up, bro. You don't want to leave without this. Also, don't forget, we're hanging out next week." Stretching his hand out, he handed me my knife with the tip of the blade, completely black. The only response I could muster was a simple head nod as I took the knife from him and went home. I called off the last 2 days because of this. My back is still killing me, but it's starting to feel better. I can't write this off as a one-off incident anymore. There's something seriously wrong with that gas station, and it might even spread to the rest of the town. I don't know. I'm terrified to go back, yet I feel as though I don't have another choice. I've been going back and forth the last 2 days writing this update, but today I got a call from my boss. He told me that we have someone new starting tomorrow and that he would like me to train them on the night shift. I don't know what this will entail, but I feel as though any day from now on could be my last. After all, I still feel like I'm being watched, even now. Still, I won't die lying down, so I'll be back soon to update you all on the happenings at my gas station. However, if I don't, assume the worst. That's it for tonight's stories, but the nightmares never end. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a new upload. Got a scary experience of your own? Share it in the comments. I just might feature it in a future video. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, some things are scarier than they seem in the dark.